A child recalls how his grandfather Ryan tells him he is destined to be a rare villain. The King Ryan warns that every continent will eventually fall because of the child's hands. Ryan's cold stare cuts as he reveals that he killed the child repeatedly in past attempts to stop that future. Yet even with all those deaths, Ryan admits fate never changed. Ryan's failures repeated endlessly as he watched the destruction of the world. A mound of broken machines sits under a storm as despair becomes the only thing left. That endless cycle pushes the king to harden himself even further. He approaches the child again in the present with his blade drawn. But on the day the child was born, Ryan felt hope take root for the first time in ages. Ryan calls the boy Cain with warmth as the child answers him politely. He gestures for Cain to come with him. Cain looks up with red eyes as the king wonders how to face a destiny that cannot be altered. He takes Cain's hand and vows to build the child's strength, so fate itself loses its power over him. Their path leads them to the fourth continent, a harsh land where strength decides everything. A violent negotiation takes place where a captured woman is dangled as leverage while blades surround her captor. The woman begs desperately for her life as she trembles in fear. The others urge their leader not to let the situation slip, insisting they can rescue the woman if they act quickly. The leader shouts in outrage as he condemns the brute for using a woman as a shield. The captor mocks their objections and reminds them that the woman's fate hinges entirely on what they choose. A cold voice cuts in and asks if the captor is truly the infamous Black Wolf demon, and the man jerks in surprise, unsure who has appeared. Cain steps forward with sharp red eyes and declares that the captor has fully surrendered to darkness. Before the brute can react, Cain moves in and strikes with overwhelming speed. Cain straightens with a chilling expression. He kneels after the strike as dark splatters fall to the ground behind him. The warriors freeze in shock and demand to know why he killed the innocent woman as well. Cain jumps as the others try to understand what kind of person he is. His blade sweeps through one of them in a burst of speed. The severed head falls just before the legs of the leader. The leader then lunges at Cain in rage, swinging down with everything he has. Cain counters instantly and forces the leader to stumble back. The leader realizes he lost his footing in the chaos and struggles to regain control. Another fighter cries out to him as Cain closes in. A scream erupts as the fighter lunges towards him. Cain states coldly that the supposed hostage was actually part of the enemy's scheme. He adds that the man he dispatched was also part of the same plan. Cain explains that they can confirm it by checking the pockets of the fallen and reveals that members of Makaro's group always carry identifying proof on them. The warriors search the bodies and pull out badges that confirm Cain's claim. One of the warriors slumps down in disbelief as he tries to process when the betrayal began. The group approaches Cain to thank him, while Cain answers modestly and says he only acted as anyone else would have. They ask how he recognized the Kokumi affiliation so quickly, and Cain admits he did not actually know. He explains that he simply targeted the ones he judged as wicked. In a busy tavern later, Cain unwinds with Rain after the mission. Cain is praised for destroying the threat and protecting the innocent, and he accepts the compliment quietly. Rain voices his doubt and presses Cain about the hostage's involvement. He questions what Cain would have done if the woman had truly been innocent. Cain listens as he is reminded that she could have been a real victim with a child. Cain insists that he acted with certainty, that they were all partners in crime. He reveals the pendant Ryan gave him years ago, and says it indicated that the two he killed were indeed villains. Ryan baffles at the idea that the sacred ring spoke, which makes Cain wonder if the artifact originates from a distant continent. Cain cautiously asks if his grandfather stole it and reminds him of his own lessons about avoiding wrongdoing. Cain starts to bring up all the other things that Rain had apparently stolen before Rain panics and tells him to stop. Rain shifts the conversation and presses Cain about the ring's ability to reveal villains. Cain explains that the ring showed him the darkness covering all three enemies. Rain muses that the sacred ring has chosen Cain and adds that Cain's destiny has finally broken free from whatever path was set before. Cain listens as Rain laughs about how far one must go just to claim neutrality with fate. Rain advises him not to think too much or he will carry the burden forever. As the night stretches, Ryan laughs loudly as he comments that Cain's physique has become beast-like and proudly calls him his grandson. Later that night, Ryan calls Cain's name as they both lay on their beds. Ryan tells him that nothing binds him anymore and urges him to live freely. Cain vows to act with kindness toward good and relentless judgment toward evil, and hearing Cain's resolve brings visible relief to the old man's face. Cain lies awake afterward, taking in the weight of Rain's gratitude. Morning arrives as Cain steps outside and notices an envelope waiting for him. He opens the letter and reads that their long journey together ends here. Rain urges him to walk his life freely, without being chained by fate. The letter's next line reminds him to stand firm no matter what others label him. Cain wears his hat as he acknowledges Ryan's last reminder. He steadies his hat and repeats the declaration that he is not a villain to solidify it within himself. A postscript directs him to seek a blacksmith named Kale in the Central Lands. Suddenly, he cuts down an attacker with a swift motion and dismisses them with cold irritation. Another assailant rushes in shouting as blood pools behind him. A blade comes for Kane's head, but he turns calmly and intercepts the strike. The enemy snarls, claiming Kane's insult left no room for mercy. Kane moves faster and cuts them down before the threat can finish speaking. His weapon snaps from the impact, and he notes how fragile it is as the remaining foes scream at him. The enemies panic and sprint toward him in fear. Kane meets their charge head-on and pierces another attacker cleanly, while the others recoil in horror. His hilt crashes into the dirt as the fight explodes. Kane leaps forward and grabs the man before he can react. He drives a heavy punch straight into the man's face. The shaken man clutches his bleeding nose in panic. Another blow lands hard and sends him collapsing again. Kane notes how hard it is to strike without going too far. The wounded man trembles and insists he is insignificant, and Kane agrees. Kane explains the simple reason behind his deduction while his pendant glows. He decides the man might still change, and tells him to face the consequences of his choices as he picks up a fallen blade, deciding it is worth keeping for future use. Kane glances toward the distant fortress and wonders about the massive white light he sensed. He thinks back to meeting the man once with his grandfather and trusts his character. An old master appears atop a rooftop, laughing as he assesses the situation. The master recalls hearing about a young mighty foreigner and notes that sensing him from so far away proves the boy is exceptional. The master wonders why Kane spared the man and feels as though Kane entrusted the man's fate to him. A girl scrambles up the roof and excitedly calls out to her master. She urges him to hurry, but he insists on stopping somewhere first. She reacts in confusion as he leaps away without warning. She rushes after him, determined not to be left behind. The injured man is struck again as the master arrives instantly. The master comments on nearly missing him while the girl questions who this stranger is. She realizes the attacker belongs to the Kuromi. She notes that the man is still barely hanging on and coldly wonders if she should finish him herself. Her master steps in and says the man will face judgment through official means. She argues that someone destined for evil cannot be redeemed, as she insists immediate action is the better choice. Her master reminds her that someone else had specifically asked for the man to be spared. She is stunned to hear the request came from so far away and begins to suspect who could have made such a request. Even the most skilled disciples once struggled to find their master when he disappeared. She admits she only found him today because she knew he occasionally visited the secluded spot. Her master laughs softly and says the mysterious boy has remarkable perception. The girl asks if the attacker was someone around her age, and her master confirms he was roughly the same. They notice the shattered sword on the ground and wonder if the boy might not have used any inner energy to protect his weapon. They look over the scattered corpses and realize that he defeated all of them without using inner power. The girl flares with excitement that Kane's physical strength and sword skills surpass hers, while the old man laughs quietly to himself. Meanwhile, the Central Continent is a neutral region created to keep peace among the world's nations. Vendors loudly promote exotic dishes and foreign crafts from across the world. Amid the packed crowd, Kane squeezes between strangers while searching for the train station. A woman tries to lure him over by calling him handsome and offering a discounted fortune reading. He declines and steps back as she persists in trying to pull him toward her booth. She changes her tactic by mentioning a famed priestess who can see destiny itself. A girl shyly steps in and asks to meet this mysterious person, requesting a glimpse into their own fate. The girl explains that she can read the destinies of others, though her own remains hidden from her. Kane notices the girl's ears and instantly recognizes her as someone from the Silver Fox clan. She steps closer and asks if her ears and tail seem strange to him as he bows slightly and apologizes for staring. She assures him there is no offense taken as she approaches. She leans in with a playful smile, suggesting he might actually be interested in her. She excitedly imagines that their meeting might be fate, and even offers to cover the cost if they get their fortunes read together, but Kane calmly refuses. She insists there is nothing more to it and admits she is nervous about getting her fortune read alone in a new place. She adds that he seems just as curious about his own destiny as she is, but he dismisses her again. She decides to leave as well, brushing past the fortune teller who watches both customers walk away. The girl's guard watches the fortune teller and wonders if she should step in, but the girl brushes it off and insists she was the one who acted out of line. Her guard calls out to her and points out that scammers are using the priestess's title for profit. The princess says it is pointless to react and admits she is more curious about the man she met earlier. She explains that she is curious because she could not read his fate at all. She admits that even for her, his existence is a complete mystery. She recalls seeing nothing in him, as if his fate was entirely blank. Her guard suggests they try to look deeper into his fate, but the princess refuses and casually says they are bound to meet again anyway. Later, Cain and the princess use their tickets for the same train route. The princess recalls that Cain oddly reminded her of an old man she met a decade ago by chance. Her guard speculates whether the old man might be the thief connected to a legendary treasure. Despite knowing he is a villain, the princess admits that the old man's lesson about fate still echoes in her mind. She senses she will definitely cross paths with Cain again. As Cain steps forward, he remembers the princess's face clearly and wonders if she is the very person his grandfather once mentioned. His grandfather had explained that 3 stars influence Cain's destiny, and that one of those stars belonged to a priestess from the Silver Fox clan who could read fate. He also remembers being warned that this priestess would one day strike his heart. What confuses him is that she didn't behave like an opponent. He wonders if her reaction means his destiny leans towards something more neutral. He recalls his grandfather saying many people were destined to end his life, but when he counts the minor destinies, the number of threats rises beyond 100. He vows to overturn every one of those destinies to survive. The capital welcomes travelers with a grand entrance and an old knight statue. He arrives and approaches someone in town while seeking a specific person. He explains that the person he's searching for supposedly works in this place. He mentions the blacksmith Kale, which causes the worker to react with sudden alarm. He presents a long wooden box as a substitute for making an appointment. She questions the object as he explains that it must be delivered directly. He says that if Kale refuses to meet even after receiving the item, he will leave without causing trouble. The girl tilts her head in confusion as she wonders if she misunderstood something. She excuses herself to check on the situation while Cain quietly notes that the ring judged her to be pure. A red-haired man enters, sighing and mutters that Amy is far too gentle with troublesome customers. He rants about how she should throw out irritating people, while Cain realizes this man carries a black aura. Cain thinks about how the man seems wicked enough to warrant immediate punishment. The man shouts that if Cain wants to meet Kale, he should pay properly instead of using tricks. He sneers that someone like Cain would never have that kind of money, while Cain calmly replies that he would not buy their weapons even if he could. Cain answers that there is no point in purchasing a sword that cannot support his power. The man challenges Cain to show his strength, claiming he can take responsibility. Cain's eyes sharpen as he taunts the man, asking if he truly believes he deserves the title of Iron Heart. Cain then points out a cheap sword that the man can take responsibility for. The man snaps in anger as Cain casually picks up the sword. Cain explains that despite its flashy exterior, the blade is poor quality and perfectly fitting for someone like the man. Cain's calm reaction proves that the man was the one who placed the fake sword to deceive inexperienced buyers. With a simple swing, he demonstrates the sword's weakness. The blade shatters instantly under the force. The clerk stares in disbelief while Cain asks if he intends to take responsibility for the shattered weapon. The clerk is stunned that a replica could break that easily and wonders how Cain pulled it off. A voice remarks that something unusual seems to be happening at the shop. Kale steps in with Amy hiding behind him and demands an explanation for the mess. The clerk panics as he points at the shattered weapon, trying to justify that Cain broke one of the store's swords. He frantically demands that the guards be called until Kale's cold command silences him. Kale steps forward and questions why a worthless item was ever allowed inside his workshop. He fixes the clerk with a furious glare and demands an answer. The clerk stammers in panic while Kale notes that the man's nervous reaction already reveals the truth. He declares that he finally understands how rumors about faulty weapons started spreading. He announces that what happened is too serious to ignore. Kale warns the clerk that he will face severe consequences for damaging the store's reputation. The man is grabbed by 2 blacksmiths and dragged away despite his desperate protests. The clerk starts to accuse Cain of insulting Kale's sword and questioning its quality. Kale snaps at him and says he will deal with the troublemaker later. Kale then turns to Cain and asks if the accusations are true. Cain calmly admits that everything said was accurate. Kale says he had high hopes when Cain brought Ryan's keepsake, but he tosses the item back and suggests that they both forget what happened. Cain catches the branch and realizes it was in the box. Kale flings a sword toward him as a begrudging reward. Cain examines the weapon without reacting, prompting irritated comments about its price and worth. He calmly takes hold of the sword. He unsheathes it and admits his earlier words may have sounded harsh. He explains that he never intended to insult the smiths and only stated a fact. He shows that even renowned blades shatter under his power as he swings. The display shocks the blacksmith, who watches the cut unfold in disbelief. The blade breaks apart midair as he completes his strike. Kale stares wide-eyed, astonished that the sword snapped without any mana behind the attack. He watches Cain stand unfazed and calls the situation unbelievable. Kale covers his face in disbelief as he realizes the boy's raw strength alone shattered the sword. With a nervous laugh, he apologizes and admits it was wrong to look down on someone of Rain's lineage. Cain softly apologizes as well, but Kale waves it off and reminds him he only spoke the truth. As they sit together, Kale asks why Cain came, noting the mistletoe branch must mean something serious. Cain explains that his grandfather forbade him from opening the box and asks if the branch is truly valuable. Kale grins and says, "Valuable is an understatement," calling it a treasure so rare it borders on divine. Cain nearly chokes on his drink as he processes the idea of it being divine. Kale explains that despite its weak aura, the branch becomes a top-tier divine blade once forged. He recalls how he once tried to convince Rain to let him forge something from the branch decades ago. Cain surprises him by calmly asking if he would craft a weapon for him instead. Cain tells him that he is unable to handle metal for some reason. He explains that every famous weapon he tries to wield breaks long before he can even make proper use of it. He reflects on how nearly all weapons in the world rely on metal, making his situation nearly hopeless. Kale contemplates the boy's condition and compares it to the traits of a legendary sea creature. He then realizes why Rain entrusted him with the branch after hearing about the boy's unusual nature. Cain lights up at the possibility of finally having a sword meant for him, and Kale assures him of it. As Cain leaves the workshop, he silently acknowledges how he nearly gave up on ever having a proper weapon while the workers around him panic. They decide the safest thing to do is inform Kale as quickly as possible. Amy volunteers to deliver the report but suddenly freezes when she encounters Cain. Cain wonders aloud if the red-haired clerk has mysteriously vanished. The workers bow frantically before him while apologizing for letting the rude man slip away. They promise to track him down and punish him properly. Cain recalls that they mistook him for a powerful master from the distant fourth continent. Most masters from that continent are eccentric except for a single sane sword god. He gently tells Amy to raise her head, which brings her a moment of relief before she notices something unexpected. The workers glance before them and wonder where Cain vanished. Suddenly, a violent ambush erupts as several attackers rush toward Cain. One confused attacker asks about the bounty right before he is swiftly struck down. Cain exploits the opening that the man never realized he left behind. His sword breaks as another attacker toward his own exposed back. Cain dismisses him as nothing more than a low-level threat. He grabs the attacker's axe, then swings it towards the others. One of them calls out in panic as the white-haired man rushes laughing. Cain stomps on him immediately, amused by the sword he's holding. The hooded man shouts for his captain as Cain strikes. Multiple assailants swarm at once, striking from every angle. A surge of power erupts outward, warping the air as the attack spirals. In a blink, bodies are sent flying behind him. The rest of the men stay frozen and trembling as Cain approaches. The surviving thug desperately claims he acted under threat, insisting his family would have been killed if he refused. Cain steps closer and offers to spare him if he answers truthfully, which only makes the man panic harder. He presses his blade to his own finger and swears upon it to prove he is sincere. A sword oath is a deadly vow that limits mana and can kill a master if broken. Cain lifts his glowing blade into the air and promises again that honesty will save the man's life. He calmly prepares his question while the trembling man waits. His eyes flare red as he leans in and demands to know who sent the attackers. The thug kneels in silence, overwhelmed by fear. The man screams as the blade drives into him, and Cain demands an answer through the pain. He twists the weapon without hesitation and forces another cry out of him. Trembling, he finally blurts out the name behind the attack, confirming Cain's suspicion. When asked about the chain of orders, he admits the request came through a large group connected to the culprit. Cain realizes that the red-haired clerk he suspected had ties to organized crime all along and understands why his past actions felt off. Pressed again, the man tries to explain there are many branches. He eventually reveals the specific place he works and where the request was passed down. Cain leans in to confirm there is no deception, and the man frantically insists he is telling the truth. After observing him, Cain acknowledges that he appears to be honest. When the man tries to leave, Cain declares that despite the truth, he still intends to kill the man. The man screams in disbelief as Cain explains that the sword oath does not apply to him. When he was a child, he consumed a celestial fruit that severed mana itself and broke the rules that once bound swords and oaths. The man begs desperately as he reminds Cain of the worth of a warrior's promise of pride. Cain acknowledges that honor matters, but only when it is shared between warriors who deserve it. He strikes without hesitation and proves that promises made to villains hold no weight. The sword shatters immediately. Walking away from the bodies left behind, he reflects that what he truly needs is a blade that will never break. The resting place Leon appears peaceful from the outside, but the appearance only holds true for the front and the lobby. A hidden passage leads deeper into the building. Beneath the surface, it functions as a hangout for violent criminals bragging about their work. Among them, a chained child sits quietly near the tables. Heavy footsteps suddenly hit the floor in frustration. The red-haired clerk named Din storms in, furious that his men failed to eliminate Cain. His anger then shifts. He turns to an infamous masked figure and admits he would have waited if he knew the man was coming. Din calmly asks if the man plans to act immediately. The man clarifies that his only order was to retrieve the information from Ironheart. Din panics inside as he wonders if the man intends to take the intel and silence him afterward. When the man reassures him, Din reluctantly hands over the item he had been hiding. Din panics when he sees him leaving and worries about losing his protection. The man scolds him sharply and points out how unnervingly silent the surroundings have become. Outside, the child innocently asks if he can finally open them as he's still covering his eyes. Cain gently tells him to keep them closed for a little longer. He comforts the child and tells him he can sleep until he is safely returned to his mother. Cain looks back when he hears Din's voice. The masked man realizes Din knows Cain when he points out that Cain's the one who humiliated him. The man surveys the aftermath and comments on how cruel Cain is for someone so young. Cain repeats the word with sharp disbelief. He mocks the idea that someone like the man could even understand what cruelty means. He recalls how he simply beheaded the man, bragging about doing the same to others, and tortured the tormentors until they died. Then man argues that mercy should have been given to the weak, which makes madness flicker in Cain's eyes when he questions why. 4. He argues that since his enemies were weaklings, he was told that showing mercy should have been enough. He remembers a lesson meant to define good and evil. He declares that mercy holds no place for people like them as he readies his blade. He offers nothing but unending malice with the child still in one arm. He taunts the man by asking what sin he carries and whether his head should roll like the last victim's. A sudden blur of movement rushes toward him before he can react. The man freezes in shock, realizing he never even saw Cain swing his sword. The blade breaks right when it makes contact. Din cries out when he sees it unfold before him. Cain warns the man not to move for a cleaner death. The wounded man finally drops limp at his feet. Cain grins manically when he turns to Din and announces that they're the only ones left. Din's desperate scream echoes as his eyes tear up. Night settles over the fortress wall. The child rests quietly while Cain mutters that Din was working with the enemy organization. He studies the small chip Din prepared to hand over before everything fell apart. Kale examines the chip and notes that it seems outdated, and Cain explains that the design is deliberately old as a security measure. Cain replies that uncovering the information that Alta stole from their workshop will take time. Kale grows frustrated that they still have no idea what Atla is planning. Cain urges him to stay cautious since they are still in the dark about Atla's intentions. Kale finally asks about the sleeping child, and Cain explains the situation, asking Kale if he can look after the child for a while. Kale agrees to take him in, noting that things are too unstable to trust the local guards. As Cain prepares to leave, Kale suddenly stops him. He reveals a scroll he discovered inside the mistletoe box, hidden in a secret compartment. He believes the letter was meant for Cain and likely written by Ryan. Cain accepts it and tells Kale he will reach out once he finds a device that can read the data chip. He turns away, saying he will head out for now. Elsewhere, the girl questions who could possibly display such overwhelming power against Atla. She asks if the mysterious fighter could possibly be an ally. Her guard concludes that the unknown fighter is terrifyingly brutal, and even as an ally would be nothing to celebrate. The princess admits the mystery fighter went a bit too far with how they handled things. She gazes up as she tries to recall where she has seen such vicious tactics before. Then she smiles at the idea of reinforcements arriving from distant continents. Her guard muses that others might be waging their own battles against Atla somewhere in secret. The princess drops her mask as she shifts the conversation back to the unknown ally. She expresses her desire to meet this person and confirm their intentions. Night falls over the city as Cain wonders when Ryan could have prepared all of this. He reads the letter that explains Rain predicted he would reach the central continent and meet Kale. As he grips the letter, he wonders how his grandfather could foresee even the priestess who sees fate. The next line reveals that his clash with Atla and Barakal was also anticipated. Cain sits at his desk when the message declares that he is fated to die at Atla's hands. At the Heavenly Machine District, he walks through the street feeling the weight of exhaustion. He reflects on how drained his body feels without mana, since people with mana stay energized and recover quickly. Cain approaches the merchant and asks about a device, but the merchant reminds him it is a very old product. Cain walks further and realizes this shop is the last place that might still carry it. He steps inside, hoping they still have what he needs. Moments later, the princess and her guard arrive and enter the shop as well. They ask the shopkeeper about the item they came looking for. The old man excitedly recognizes the device they mean and explains that the last one was sold to someone else not too long ago. The princess is stunned to hear it is already gone. Her guard pulls her away and notes that no regular buyer would bother with such an outdated device. They decide the only option is to track down whoever purchased it, so the princess turns toward the shopkeeper. She tries to charm the old man, acting eager to see the rare device. She asks sweetly if he can share anything about the person who bought it. Kane slots a small device into the side of a tablet. He watches in surprise as a holographic screen lights up before him. The screen reveals a detailed plan, outlining Atla's intention to seize Ironheart's weapons and abduct Kale and his daughter. Alarmed, he decides he needs to warn Kale immediately but is suddenly interrupted. The priestess rushes toward him with excitement, recognizing him from the port. He wonders why she appeared now as she insists he should remember her. He notices her guard standing behind her while she admits she would have cried if he claimed not to remember. His attention snaps downward as she steps closer. She leans in and stares at him with confusion, troubled that his fate remains unreadable to her. Her guard urges her to focus as she continues inspecting him far too intently. The princess suddenly leans forward and bluntly questions him if he's a member of Atla. He calmly explains that he is not part of Atla and even opposes them. She celebrates her hunch while a man approaches and reveals himself as the one who had set the trap. He steps into view and recognizes her as the princess from the second continent. Her guard reacts instantly and shields her when he identifies the man as an Atla executive. The crowd panics at the mention of Atla and scrambles to flee the scene. The intruder taunts them as he steps forward, only to be met with a warning to stay back. The man shifts his tone and demands to know why they came to the central continent. He answers his own question, pointing out that purchasing the old device means they were investigating Atla. A sudden vibration erupts from Kane's tablet, catching the group off guard. The man realizes the princess was not the one who bought the old device. Kane calmly lifts the tablet and questions whether it was used to track them, and the man admits they planted it in the shop to lure out anyone opposing their group. The man laughs proudly while explaining that the trap allowed them to catch someone valuable. The man then asks whether Kane is connected to the princess, and Kane insists he is just an ordinary passerby. One of his followers pulls out a large speaker-like device. He announces the beginning of the spectacle as the princess's guard instinctively steps forward to shield her. The villain presses a button and triggers the device. A deafening pulse erupts from the speakers. The princess collapses in agony as the man proudly declares the attack to be the power of their anti-beastman weapon. Kane watches as the device continues to emit pulses, recognizing it as a weapon specifically designed to harm beastmen. The man mocks them with wild laughter as he promises they will wake up in a hidden prison. The guard collapses on the ground with a groan. The princess falls beside her as she apologizes in a dazed panic. Kane watches it unfold silently. The man turns his attention to him and prepares to deal with him next. Kane listens as he is told to cooperate and follow along for questioning, making him realize he is about to be taken to their base. The man pulls out handcuffs and says he is in such a good mood after capturing the princess. Kane smirks as he agrees to comply for now. The guard wakes up shivering in darkness, struggling to understand where she is. She looks for the princess and tries to move despite the pain and the restraints holding her down. She recognizes the iron cuffs while Kane calls out to her. He explains that the princess was taken away moments earlier. Panic sets in as she realizes the attackers succeeded and no guards were called to stop them. The guard notices Kane's cuffs, and he confirms that the attackers are planning to take his sword. He declares that the sword is irreplaceable and decides he will confront them himself. As he stands up, she urgently points out that both of them are completely restrained. He calmly notes that no matter how special the cuffs are, they are still made of metal. In a sudden surge of strength, he shatters the restraints with brute force. He moves in close and tells her to stay still as he swiftly works to free her. She stares in disbelief as her own cuffs crumble to pieces at his feet. The princess steps aside while Kane questions the enemy. He tells her to wait outside as he refuses to let her see what happens. She obeys and shuts the heavy door behind her. Neril calls out to her in relief the moment she enters the hallway. The princess rushes in and embraces Neril tightly. Their reunion is interrupted by screams echoing violently from inside the interrogation room. Neril quietly questions who Kane is and what he could possibly want. Kane finally steps out and apologizes for the delay, urging to leave quicker. When asked about the prisoner, he casually states that the man is dead. Neril insists on confirming it herself despite his warning. Kane warns her that pushing further will make her regret. Inside the cell lies a mangled corpse, so brutal it makes her recoil. Later, the group reaches a cliffside view and realizes the enemy hid their base far out of sight. He decides this spot is safe enough from pursuit and asks them to stop for a moment. He hands them a blueprint revealing the device that incapacitated them. Both girls react with alarm once they recognize what the diagrams mean. He explains that the weapon was designed specifically to target beastmen by disrupting their internal energy flow. Neril bites her lip, disturbed that something like this even exists. The girls bow in gratitude, but he brushes it off, saying he has reasons of his own for helping. His expression hardens as he announces that he has uncovered Atla's true objective. He reveals that Atla intends to bring down the entire central continent. He explains that destroying it would shatter the four-continent peace treaty, and with chaos sparked everywhere, the group plans to ignite a global war. After draining every nation's military through endless conflict, Atla intends to seize total control. The two women stare in disbelief as the scale of the plan hits them. Kane finally grasps why he had once been warned that Atla could cost him his life. He tells them he must now act on his own, and they start to convince him to come to their base so they can thank him properly. Kane refuses because he needs to prepare, as Atla could strike Iron Heart at any moment. The princess gently stops him and asks if he can at least promise to meet again. She sets a meeting for tomorrow at a tavern in the central district. Kane accepts and leaps away effortlessly, leaving them stunned by how skilled he truly is. Neril stiffens as the thought hits her that Kane's strength might rival the Beast King's. The princess suddenly wonders aloud if their meeting with him was written by fate. At nighttime, Kane finally arrives at Kale's place. Kale answers the door and hears that the data chip's contents have been decoded. He buries his face in his hand, shaken by what Atla had been planning. By the fire, Kane explains that Atla aims to start a war and will target Ironheart to fuel it. When asked if hiding is an option, Kale stands and says they could never avoid being found. He adds that because Kane attacked Atla's base, they are now hunting him relentlessly. Kane apologizes, but Kale brushes it off and blames the pressure of the mistletoe branch. He promises the sword will be completed, but hints there is still a problem looming. He explains a rare metal from the second continent that can neutralize the mistletoe branch and is crucial to completing the sword. He admits the metal is hard to obtain, but Kane suggests there may be a way to secure it quickly. The next day at the tavern, he shares a meal with the girls and brings the rare metal up. Kane asks if the princess is able to obtain it as soon as possible. She calmly explains that getting the metal is possible, but will take time as she gazes over Neril. When told the material does not need processing, she immediately realizes it can be obtained at once. She firmly demands Neril's sword, but her guard pleads that she cannot lose something so valuable. After a tense pause, the blade is reluctantly placed on the table. Kane calmly offers to share everything he knows without hesitation. Shia eyes him with suspicion as she wonders why he is being so generous. She leans in and bluntly asks what he is really after. Kane shrugs it off and admits he simply wants to work together. Shia bursts in surprise as she realizes he is proposing an alliance. Kane explains that handling Atla requires allies he can trust before preparing to leave. Shia tries to stop him in a panic and hands him a map to their inn. She suddenly grabs his wrist with something else on her mind. She introduces herself warmly and gives him her name. Kane realizes he has not introduced himself yet and decides a first name will do. Shia watches him leave and murmurs that his name suits him well. Kane sits across from the two girls as Shia asks if he truly trusts them. He calmly says he does, insisting he can tell at a glance that they mean no harm. He adds that if they doubt him, he cannot force them otherwise. Kane tells them he is unsure how long this partnership will last, but hopes they can work together for now. Kane grips his sword and prepares to head out as they all bid farewell. Under the moonlight, Kale stares in disbelief as he holds the sword that Kane delivered. He recalls Kale promising that his new blade will be finished in a week, and the thought of wielding a sword that will never break fills him with excitement. Reaching town, Kane tries to recall the exact location he was given. He delivers the coded password exactly as instructed, and a voice from inside recognizes him and tells him to enter. The door swings open to Neril as she notes how fast he returned. He explains the errand was simple and immediately wonders why one of the beastmen possessed a blood flow suppression device. The beastman sits nearby as he pieces together the truth. The man's eyes widen when he sees Kane's reflection approaching with intent. He panics as Kane closes in. Kane immediately tells him to drop his act with a sinister smile. The moment he lunges forward, the attack slams into the beastman before he can react. The man's head instantly falls on the ground. The others react in panic and alarm as Kane explains calmly that his introduction only took long because someone interfered. He lifts his hat and formally introduces himself as their new housemate. The beast woman explodes in rage and charges straight at Kane with her blade drawn. Kane meets her attack with his own and sends her tumbling back into her own group. She shouts at him again, refusing to let it end there. The whole group leaps at him at once, ready to attack together. They all rush him in a storm of weapons and movement. He blocks and redirects them as she gets thrown upward by the chaos. He takes a glance behind him. Neril watches without stepping in while one of her people struggles to hold back the fight. An enraged beastman charges Kane with a wild scream. Kane blocks the incoming blow as his sword breaks. Kane calmly explains that the man they attacked earlier had actually been a spy. The beast woman rejects the accusation, insisting the man couldn't possibly be a spy. Neril questions him about the reason behind his suspicion, and he asks if she knows about Jeffrel's school. He explains that the school specializes in physical magic and that this particular technique belongs to them. He reveals that the spy was using body transformation magic as the corpse begins to morph. The group recoils in shock as they witness the dead man's face shifting into an unfamiliar one. Kane explains that a special stone was implanted in the spy's body, allowing him to mimic another person's mana perfectly. Neril hears that the man was sent by Atla and accepts that Kane only acted because he was sure. She then asks how he managed to see through a Jeffrel magic technique despite being a swordsman. She also asks why he kept the spy's identity to himself instead of warning them. Kane says the first question has an easy answer and reveals he knows everything about all 73 magic schools across the continent. Kane says the second answer is complicated and blames his tendency to act compulsively. He recalls how Rain shaped Kane's fate so that his malice would only ever turn toward evil targets. He admits that whenever he senses evil now, his body moves on its own. Later on the second floor of the lodging, Neril asks him to explain himself before acting next time. Kane apologizes and promises to control himself better during the mission. Neril still thanks him for what he did and says she will request a reward for him from the princess. She tells him that Shia is currently praying at the top floor. Panic takes over as she lunges forward, shouting for the princess. A sudden realization hits her as she remembers who was responsible for preparing the altar. She bursts into the chamber and finds the princess standing there. Relief settles briefly when they see each other safe. Shea asks if the lower floors have been attacked, and Neril says it's a little more complicated than that. Shea notes that only a handful of people could realistically threaten her at this point. She laments that the attackers did not survive, since capturing them could have revealed more useful information. Then she senses with certainty that one enemy still remains somewhere nearby. Even though the presence has been carefully erased, she trusts her perception under the moonlight. Without hesitation, she dashes off toward the threat while Neril scrambles after her in panic. Neril realizes the only one capable of erasing their presence right now is Kane. She notes that Shia's full moon power rivals the Beast King in his prime. Neril races ahead. Terrified Kane might not withstand the princess's strength unguarded. Kane blocks the princess's sudden attack without flinching and notes that she's stronger than he expected. Shia freezes in shock when she realizes she struck Kane. She apologizes while Neril mentally reels from what she just witnessed. Neril recalls that even the Beast King could not have stopped that strike so effortlessly. Her thoughts conclude with the terrifying possibility that Kane surpasses even the Beast King. Kane fills Shia in that Jael had been a spy all along and links it to magic that hid his true nature. Shia explains that her power to read fate works as long as she can look directly at the person. She clarifies that her ability depends on sensing a person's unique mana. Kane reflects on how no one can hide mana from the priestess' sight and acknowledges that her detection ability is so strong it feels unfair. Neril calls her out in shock for revealing sensitive information, but Shia insists her life matters more than protecting a state secret. Neril sighs and warns Kane that what he heard is confidential. Kane stays silent, prompting them to call his name in confusion. Kane stands up and tells them that there's danger closing in. He tells them that enemies have surrounded the entire area. Meanwhile, the enemies positioned far away question why their ally reported so late. Ratman appears irritated as he rants about how Jael should have taken the job seriously. Rashid explains that they do not need to deal with Jael since transformation magic is risky enough to kill its user. Jay shuts Ratman down when he laughs about Rashid's trick. Ratman tries to act tough toward Jay, but Jay states that the spy infiltrated long ago and has not returned. Both of them furiously ask their commander for permission to kill the other as they butt heads. The commander says that anyone who draws a blade in front of him will be killed. Kane notices the radiating lethal intent from the rank 12 enemy. Rashid orders Jay to notify the others and warns that if no report comes soon, they move forward with the mission. Ratman eagerly prepares himself, excited that the operation is about to begin. He turns to Rashid to get some kind of affirmation. His face twists in shock as he realizes something is terribly wrong. He panics and tries to warn Jay that they are being attacked. He turns and sees Jay lying motionless on the rooftop. Ratman stares ahead in confusion, trying to make sense of what just happened. Kane appears before Ratman, who panics and demands answers. He shouts again, demanding to know if Kane caused the carnage. Kane remains calm, as Ratman insists on being acknowledged. Kane then appears behind him and questions whether Ratman even counts as a person. He coldly reduces the enemy to nothing more than meat while cutting him down. Ratman's body hits the ground as Kane casually wipes his blade. He inspects the sword with satisfaction, seeing it as a reliable tool for the next few days. Meanwhile, Neril calmly announces that their base must be abandoned now that the enemy has discovered them. She orders the others to leave no trace and carry only what is needed. Kane finally returns to the base and steps inside where the others gather. Nerl starts asking if he counted the enemies and noted the commander's appearance, which leaves him confused. She explains that knowing who they are fighting matters, but he seems unsure why that information is necessary. He casually reveals that there is no enemy left to study because he already wiped them out. She stares at him in disbelief, still trying to process what he accomplished. Her attention shifts to the sword, and he admits he simply took the blade as a trophy after defeating its owner. She freezes when they learn he unknowingly killed the sacred magic swordsman. She explains that the man he defeated was Rashid, a powerful executive known for his magic sword. She adds that the sword is said to be able to cut through anything, which makes him smile. She jumps in shock when he admits he has no idea about swords. Nerl starts piecing together that he might not actually be a swordsman at all. Then a sudden burst of light suspends her thoughts. Shia's transformation completes, and she calmly announces her readiness. She thanks Cain for the scouting effort and takes command of the situation. When he offers to handle the attackers, she refuses and insists they cannot rely on him further. He casually explains that he already eliminated everyone, which makes her freeze and unsure how to respond. In a dark inn far from them, a report arrives that Rashid's communication has suddenly stopped. An executive of Atla named Van steps forward with disbelief at the news. He insists Rashid should never have lost to the Beast King's royal guard given his near rank 7 strength. The subordinate reports that Shia carries a bloodline rumored to surpass even the Beast Kings. They discuss how beastman instincts combined with awakened blood would be dangerous. The girl decides to confirm everything through their intelligence network. Van asks what their next move should be since they need a new plan after Rashid's failure. She reveals they already prepared a contingency plan. Van chuckles and leaves her to her team and shifts his focus to another task. The next day, Cain walks along the forest ruins on the edge of town. He remembers agreeing to split up with the 2 girls and regroup the next morning. He arrives 2 hours early and decides to reflect quietly while waiting. He settles into meditation and recalls how the body and mind guide one another in a cycle. Ryan challenges him to figure out which one truly leads. His first assignment is to unravel that question during meditation, making him wonder if today will be the day he understands. Meanwhile, Shia walks tiredly beside Nerl after overexerting her awakened power. They realize they have been wandering in circles despite knowing this forest well. A strange flow of energy spirals through the trees around them. They sense an unusual presence and rush toward it, wondering if something sacred is nearby. They push through the bushes and are shocked to find Cain radiating mysterious energy. The princess compares the scene to a famous artwork her brother once showed her. Her memory shifts into a painted image mirroring Cain's current state. A sudden realization hits her just as a dark vortex begins forming at Cain's core. A burst of violent energy erupts as she recognizes heavenly evil. Cain steadies himself in a cosmic space and sighs as the strange phenomenon repeats. He reflects on how his mana vanished after eating the celestial peach, yet briefly returns during introspection. He admits he still cannot reach an answer and suddenly notices 2 blurry figures appear. Snapping back to reality, he sees the 2 girls watching him and asks how long they were there. They tell him they arrived moments ago, and he questions why he failed to sense them at all. Cain greets them calmly, startling the princess, who reacts in embarrassment. She waves her hands nervously and explains she saw something odd and must still be half asleep. Time passes, and a gathered crowd waits as the group arrives. The group apologizes to the girls, but Nerl insists the delay was Cain's responsibility. Cain looks confused as he wonders if he accidentally caused trouble. He learns that the mana he released twisted the forest into a maze without him realizing it. Nerl describes the energy they felt as something close to pure nature. The celestial peach contains concentrated energy from the divine realm, which makes it radiate the same type of energy found in nature. Cain wonders if the peach's natural aura spilled out during his introspection. Nerl decides to begin their meeting before the day gets ahead of them. Shia recalls the ominous black void she glimpsed earlier and struggles to understand what it meant. She refuses to believe it was Cain's fate, but still worries over what that vision represented. Nerl ends the briefing and orders everyone to move out immediately. The communications officer sets up equipment while the team prepares to advance. The supply officer marches with the group carrying heavy packs. A recon mage activates an alarm spell to support the mission. Cain turns to Nerl and praises her capabilities. She explains they must return to the second continent soon and worries about leaving after Cain helped them. She begins explaining their upcoming schedule before Cain notices a signal. A surge of energy shocks her as the transmission connects. She reports that Atla has begun to move, but they're not approaching their location. Atla is currently wreaking havoc in the capital's downtown district as their men torture civilians. Kale is ordered to sign a forced contract. His eyes widen when the man reveals the order from Ironheart. 2 people stand outside Ironheart as the place announces it is closed for the day. The guards explain they are dealing with issues they cannot resolve in time. The guards overhear customers praising how polite and friendly the vigilantes are. One of the guards vents his frustration about how their reputation is too restrictive. His partner panics and warns him to keep his voice down before they get in trouble. They both then, as he thinks he heard something unexpected nearby. A sudden strike pierces the first guard before he can react. The second guard is grabbed, and his neck is twisted instantly. Kane stands before them and expresses gratitude for the support that helped resolve the situation smoothly. A chilling smile follows the declaration that their help is freely given. The guards rush forward in panic as they recognize the incoming attack. Kane slips beside one of them with terrifying speed. One guard collapses before he even understands what happened. The remaining guard realizes too late that he is completely outmatched and begs for backup. Kane grabs his head and explains that no one outside can see or hear him. Then he reports that all outside surveillance has already been eliminated. He asks if they can now move on to placing the talismans, and Shia instructs him to install them with precise spacing across the area. The talismans are placed instantly as Kane confirms exact measurements. Shia is stunned by his speed while he casually comments on his sense of distance. She realizes his precision is far beyond normal and even surpasses tribes known for extreme sensitivity. The barrier activates and seals off the entire district in a shimmering dome. She tells him that the barrier will last 10 minutes, which he decides is more than enough. Under the full moon, her clan transforms into a force meant to crush enemies with raw power. Outside the full moon, they act as support specialists who manipulate formations with mastery. He notes with satisfaction that having her strengthens his plans dramatically. Back in Kale's workshop, the group threatens to throw more people into the fire unless the contract is signed immediately. Terrified, Kale prepares to comply as they begin a countdown. He panics and finally agrees to cooperate as the man frantically holds up the contract. The man smirks and reminds Kale that he ordered him to sign before the countdown ended. The man charges forward with twisted excitement, eager to hear more screams. He boasts triumphantly that this is what happens when someone challenges Atla. Amy screams for Kale's help when the flames close in, just as a voice suddenly describes the gruesome pain of being burned alive. Kane appears and lists each stage of suffering with a grin, noting how the agony prevents even fainting. He steps forward and calmly explains that the victim will feel every cell die until the very end. He hopes the man savors the punishment fully as he closes in to deliver it. The man bursts apart in the flames as his agony echoes through the room. Kane turns back to the trembling group and casually asks who wants to be next. Later, Kale holds Amy close as he tries to reassure her, even though she winces from the pain. Kane steps in and stops the workers from giving Amy ice before they can make her injury worse. He adds that a healer is already waiting outside the barrier for moments like this. Outside, Shia senses Kane's sharp intent and flinches at the sudden pressure. Kane brings her over and asks if she can treat Amy's burns. Shia examines the girl gently and prepares her healing technique. Amy touches her face in surprise as the pain vanishes instantly. The workers are stunned by the level of healing and remark on Kane's impressive companions. Kane evaluates her quietly and admits her support potential is far beyond what he imagined. Neril informs them that only a few minutes remain before the barrier drops and urges them to move quickly. Kale urges everyone to evacuate at once while the workers hesitate. One of them panics about leaving their stored weapons behind, but Kale insists that survival matters more. As they start leaving, Kane calls out for him to stop. He asks Lord Kale to stay a moment because he has a personal request. A glowing formation flares to life as Shia channels her power. She extends the protective barrier long enough to buy them extra time. Kale realizes he forgot the mistletoe in his room, as Kane decides it is faster to pass through the main storage. He plans to retrieve every finished weapon and shows a small cube that will somehow make it possible. Shia reaches for the cube, curious about what it is, but Kane warns her away from touching it. The cube transforms into a monstrous mimic chest that snaps open with rows of teeth. Kane immediately apologizes as Neril clings to the shaken princess. The creature is a mimic born from the greed-twisted secrets of the labyrinth. Kale demands to know how Kane obtained something with a demonic legacy long forgotten. A sudden stomp breaks through the wooden door. Atlas soldiers charge in, shouting in confusion at the destruction. They discover the storage room completely empty and panic over the missing weapons. The commander orders his men to seize every blacksmith and their families. His rage spirals as he vows brutal vengeance on those who dared defy Atla. Meanwhile, Kale and the others arrive at the evacuation point where the blacksmiths greet them. The blacksmiths explain that Atla targeted not only them but also their loved ones. Kane watches the workers chatter around him, quietly admitting that Neril's quick coordination still catches him off guard. Kale admits he is unsure of their next destination while Shia casually invites them to join her on the second continent, where a royal airship will be arriving in 4 days. Hearing that, Kale lights up and tries to hand over his greatest creation as thanks. He asks if she can grant them a favor, explaining that they simply need a place to work on an unfinished sword before the journey. He presents the sword's materials, revealing that it is a special blade that will be completed in 4 days for Kane. The two girls arrive at an abandoned factory, offered as the only available workspace. Shia asks if he has managed to contact their homeland yet, and Neril explains that reaching the first prince directly has been difficult because they keep avoiding other terminals. She says they could contact immediately if they allowed their signal to be detected by any terminal, but Shia refuses. Neril grows uneasy at the thought that one of the 13 might truly be a spy. The 13 stationed at the terminals are elite figures, trusted by the kingdom, and among them are the prince's top guardians, the finest warriors, and several high-ranking officials. Shia explains that only those 13 know the source of her strength, and insists they contact only the one person guaranteed to be loyal. That person is the first prince, respected by all and acknowledged as her brother. The two reflect on how mysterious Lord Cain is and how he possesses a rare artifact. They both admit that they do not fully understand Cain but believe he is not aligned with evil. Yet Shia remembers the terrifying aura that once surged from him. 4 days later, Cain thanks Neril for the traps she set around the area. They then gather the artisans and prepare to depart. Shia tells Cain it would have been ideal if he could join them, but they will return as soon as possible. She refuses to take her time since delaying might force Cain to solve the situation alone. Kale then reminds Cain that the sword cannot be handled until it is fully complete. Cain reassures him and says he is grateful most of the work is done. The group waits at the shoreline as the royal airship approaches. Neril tells Shia that the airship arrived exactly on time. An attack suddenly strikes Shia at high speed. The attacker says everything is unfolding just as the Emperor predicted. Both girls realize their plans have been leaked. The hostile group identifies them as the people who rescued the Iron Hearts. The leader grows irritated when no one responds and prepares to force answers out. One of the enemies orders the activation of the speaker device. A warning spreads for everyone to stop using blood circulation abilities immediately. They start to realize that Neril's group understands the device and grow even more irritated by the situation. Their leader scolds his men and points out that the device is useless because the beastfolk are not even using the technique it's meant to counter. His subordinate launches forward and orders his troops to wipe everyone out, while Neril throws herself into combat and asks Shia to secure enough time for escape. Shia takes command and tells Neril to fall back, since her own techniques are unaffected by the suppression device. The enemy panics when he notices the princess preparing something, but it is already too late. Shia scatters her talismans into the air to activate her formation. The talismans spread out across the field as the spell begins to take shape. A bright shock of light explodes in front of the attacking soldiers. A massive spiritual beast emerges as Shia's protection formation. Genbu manifests around her allies. She pushes more power into the barrier and refuses to let anyone set foot inside it. Meanwhile, Cain waits alone in the abandoned factory, wondering how long the sword will take to finish. Seeing the Black Fang sword beside him, he debates returning it to Neril. He hesitates because he cannot leave his new sword unattended. Back at the battlefield, Shia maintains the barrier while the enemy closes in. The enemy complains that if he fails here, he will be executed. He looks at Shia and mockingly asks if he himself should give up. Suddenly, the royal airship arrives overhead. Neril shouts that everyone has boarded and urges Shia to retreat. The enemy laughs as he realizes the barrier cannot be maintained from afar, certain the shield will collapse the moment she moves. Shia winces as she forces herself to hold the formation, accepting that getting caught alone is better than letting her people die. Neril races toward her and begs her to release the barrier so she can protect her. Shia apologizes as she prepares to use the sacred authority that compels absolute obedience she once vowed never to invoke. Neril panics as the command strikes her and forces her body to obey. Neril recites the order aloud, shaking as she accepts she must abandon her princess. She starts to run as she begs not to be forgiven for leaving. The airship departs while the enemy casually comments on their emotional farewell. He taunts Shia, telling her it is time to release the formation and walk toward them. He pretends to reassure her before a massive strike suddenly slams down in front of him. The sight of the weapon shocks her as she recognizes the sword being used. Cain catches her in his arms as exhaustion finally takes her. The men panic as their captain suddenly falls in battle, demanding if their attacker even knows who they are. Cain walks towards them and mocks the idea that people like them are capable of loyalty or camaraderie. He watches their bodies freeze as he questions why people like them are allowed to exist at all. He takes the sword back from the captain's head and notes with relief that the Black Fang's blade survived the impact. One of the remaining men charges forward, shouting at Cain. Cain sighs at how hopeless they seemed as he finishes the man in a single strike. Another group tries to rush him, only to be met with their colleague's fallen body. They scream as they throw themselves at Kane in desperation. Kane swiftly finishes them off as he declares that the only value they can offer this world is through their deaths. More attackers charge in fear and desperation as they try to mob him, shouting that sheer numbers will be enough to bring him down, but the next moment reveals their bodies scattering across the ground. Kane notes that Neryl's magic sword held up well even though he swung it casually. He then carries Shia to find a safe place for treatment. Elsewhere, Van chokes his subordinate and asks for confirmation that Shia escaped. She explains that a powerful warrior suddenly appeared and ruined the capture. She insists Van should see the recording himself, revealing that she always assigns her members to carry mana recorders in case of emergencies. The recording shocks Van and asks for the recorder's grade, only to be told it is top tier. He mutters that only 3 people exist whose strength cannot be captured by a device like this: the Sword Saint, Rhine, and Atlas Boss. Van concludes that Kane must be on par with the Sword Saint and likely as strong as their own leader. He speculates that Rhine may have infiltrated the central continent in secret. Shia lies bruised on a cracked stone ground, slowly regaining consciousness. She forces herself upright while wondering if she was imprisoned by the enemy. She thinks of Neryl, asking her not to carry any guilt for what happened. Neryl's vow echoes again, recalling her obedience to the order that forced her to flee. Shia fears that once Neryl returns home and the command is lifted, she might choose a tragic fate. Overwhelmed with dread, she silently begs for that fear not to be true. She breaks down crying and apologizes in her heart to her family, Neryl, and even Lord Kane. Kane then approaches her and apologizes as if he had simply dozed off nearby, while she questions whether he is real or just a hallucination. He checks on the princess and tries to reassure her while she's still recovering. She breaks into tears when she realizes Kane is real and makes Kane panic and thinks she is hurt somewhere. He offers her a radiant elixir, saying it will help her recover. Just being near its glow already eases the pain in her body. She hesitates, insisting something so valuable should not be used on her. Kane wonders if this is not the exact moment he is supposed to give it to her, as he recalls Rain urging him to save the priestess. Kane tells her to simply let him know when she actually needs it, while she thanks him quietly. She asks about his sword, and Kane reveals he brought it inside a mimic so he would not be considered in direct contact with it. He calls for the mimic to reveal the stored blade. Kane admits he still does not know whether the sword continues to mature while inside the creature. Light bursts out from the mimic as the box begins to react. Far above, the royal airship sails steadily through clear skies. Kale's subordinate approaches him and asks why he's been sighing so much. Kale blames himself, thinking Kane would not have been stuck in that factory if the sword did not need to mature. His subordinate asks if the maturing process is really that troublesome. Kale explains that the sword itself is simple to mature, but absorbing enough mana is the issue. Meanwhile, Kane and Shia watch the shaking mimic while wondering what exactly is happening. Kane wonders if the mimic may have accelerated the sword's maturing process on its own. He decides they can move immediately, and asks the mimic for the Black Wolf sword as well. He says this moment is perfect to strike Atlas base since the central continent is nearly deserted. He reasons that the higher-ups must be gone since they never stepped in during the airship attack. He suggests heading straight to the enemy base to gather intel. Then he reaches out his hand and tells the princess he needs her support. Inside Atlas base, the surveillance commander demands that his team track them down at all costs. He panics because failure to find her within 3 days means his death. One of the cameras shorts out as Shia's awareness-blocking magic keeps them hidden. Shia peeks around the corner, while Kane notes how conveniently the trick is working. A group of guards spot them and charge forward in alarm. Kane grabs hold of his weapon immediately. He bursts through the squad with a sudden sweeping strike that sends bodies flying in every direction. He swings the borrowed blade with quick precision and cuts down the men rushing him. The commander storms into the hallway, shouting as he kicks forward in confusion. He freezes when he spots the princess, noting that he never expected her to come here herself. Kane lunges at him with a clenched fist before he can even finish speaking. Shia shouts for Kane to stop as his fist stops right in front of the commander's face. She steps in and decides the officer is still useful for their mission. She presses a charm onto his forehead and demands he reveal the access code. Under the spell, he lists the numbers while Kane inputs them into the system. The terminal unlocks successfully, displaying their access as they watch the screen light up. Kane studies the screen with Shia as they uncover reports detailing the invasions spreading across multiple continents. He realizes the data shows invasion progress measured in percentages. He focuses on the first continent's status that is nearly consumed with a staggering 99%. He recalls how the unified kingdom his grandfather built once stood strong, but he sees its collapse after 14 years right before his eyes. He silently questions what his father could possibly be doing during all this. Rage slips out as he vows to destroy Atla while Shia watches him with concern. He apologizes, admitting he lost control because Atla is his homeland. She asks about the remaining continents and whether they face similar danger. Kane reports that the third continent is barely touched while the second continent sits at 38%. Kane studies the map and notes that her royal family is still holding out despite the invasion. Shia realizes her earlier suspicion was misplaced and admits her brother was not involved. She explains that only 3 people knew about the return operation, and she is relieved the doubt is gone. Kane warns her that it is too soon to relax as he points out that Neril has no idea what is happening right now. Kane adds that if Neril believed the first prince betrayed them, things would escalate quickly. She panics as she realizes she needs to inform her father immediately upon reaching the second continent. Kane explains that imprisoning the prince would fracture trust in the royal family. He concludes that the weakened sanctuary will make it easier for Atla to seize that moment and overrun the second continent entirely. She asks anxiously what they are supposed to do next in this situation. Kane decides their best option is to head straight for the central headquarters in Barakal. It is the largest Atla base, with more than 1,000 members gathered within it. He says their only option is to break through enemy lines and find a communication device before Neril reaches the second continent. Her eyes narrow as she processes the urgency of the situation. The airship moves steadily toward the second continent with time ticking down. Shia urges them to move quickly as the reminder appears that only 8 hours remain. Atla's massive headquarters looms as furious shouting erupts inside. The commander berates his men in the middle of the facility, demanding results they still do not have. His subordinates scramble to explain that nearly everyone has already been mobilized for the search. The commander mutters that a terrifying person will soon arrive in the central continent. His men glance around nervously, realizing who he might be referring to. A squad rushes down the hallway, answering his call with frantic urgency. He snaps at them for abandoning their post, unable to understand why they moved in the first place. They insist he told them to head to the basement because of an intruder alert. Kane's calm voice echoes as he reveals he gathered them intentionally for a clean and swift takedown. The soldiers freeze as Kane approaches, demanding to know who he is. He steps out of the shadows and introduces himself as the Grim Reaper. The lights abruptly cut out, leaving the soldiers confused as they stare at him in the darkness. Shia calmly tells him that she shut down the entire power grid. She explains that she is also activating the sensory talisman. The commander rallies his men to stay focused, only for Kane to instantly close in and drive his fist into the commander's face. A violent impact sends the commander crashing back. One soldier calls out in panic for the commander just before a fist slams into him from the darkness. Kane tests the weight of his sword and notes its usefulness by sound alone. He steps forward and says it is time to see what it can do, while a terrified guard begs for mercy. Kane responds to the plea with an unsettling grin that promises nothing good. Watching through the monitor, Shia observes the red silhouettes, gathering with the illusion magic she cast for Kane. She stares in shock as the scene resembles a ruthless massacre carried out by someone who looks like he enjoys killing. She wonders if her earlier vision filled with darkness might have been showing Kane's fate all along. Remembering how Leon was found in a similar condition, she begins to question if her suspicions are true. Kane stands before the silent troops with his sword resting on his shoulder, pleased that they finally understand the fear in the room. Kane decides the fight is becoming dull and hints he wants to change the rules. A terrified man peeks out, startled as Kane announces a challenge. Several men immediately jump up, begging to be spared as panic spreads through the room. Kane realizes multiple soldiers begged at the same time and quietly admits that it ruins his plan. He concludes that he has no choice but to kill everyone. Kane unleashes a wide sweeping attack that cuts down the entire group in one motion. Bodies crash to the ground as Kane stands alone in the aftermath. He wipes his chin and notes that fighting entirely by sound made the battle more exhausting than usual. He examines the talisman and realizes the sensory enhancement didn't activate at all. The talisman should let him see in the dark, and Kane wonders aloud why it failed, questioning if it requires the user's own mana. He decides the only way to get answers is to go ask Shia directly. Kane finds her, but she immediately approaches with something she wants to clarify herself. She asks if he takes pleasure in killing, catching him completely off guard. She presses him harder, accusing him of enjoying how he toyed with the enemies before finishing them. A surge of power cuts their exchange short as a man calls out Shia's name. They turn toward the source of the overwhelming electric aura. Van appears and asks what Shia is doing there. Van mocks Kane for intruding so boldly into Atla's headquarters. He unleashes a violent burst of lightning while vowing to tear Kane apart. Kane analyzes the movement and realizes Van intends to eliminate him first to make capturing Shia easier. Shia calls out Kane's name as the impact connects. Van taunts her with a smug grin and claims she is still useful enough to keep alive. Kane suddenly lunges towards him and notes that even Van's temper crackles like a storm while he prepares to strike. Kane throws up a strike and Van is thrown back through the air. Kane's sword breaks at the impact. Shia looks ahead anxiously and asks if their battle has finally ended. Kane tells her it is not over yet and asks her to put on the sacred item resting inside the mimic. She panics at the sight of a legendary relic and demands to know why Kane has something so important. Kane remembers being entrusted with the relic and told it would cleanse his nature, but that it had to be returned someday. The relic can awaken the sealed power in the Shia's bloodline, which will make her rise to become the strongest of her kind in history. He tells her he will explain everything later, but asks her to help him first. He admits he will be out cold after the fight and needs someone to guard him. Van twitches with rage as sparks crack through his body. Kane urges Shia to retreat while stepping between her and Van. Van roars with fury and unleashes a violent surge of electricity. Kane braces against the blast while calling for Shia to move. She runs with a conflicted apology as he struggles to hold the attack back. Kane pushes forward through the electric storm, refusing to let it overwhelm him. The remains of the weapon he used to block the attack suddenly goes flying. Van gathers power into both hands as the room erupts with unstable lightning. Kane admits he thought rank 8 would be impressive, but now sees nothing worth worrying about as he rushes towards Van. Van charges forward with a punch fueled by lightning. Kane calmly catches the electrified fist with his bare hand. Shock hits Van as he realizes the lightning has been completely stopped. Kane tightens his grip as he explains he will demonstrate how that power should really be used. His fist slams into Van with overwhelming force. Van is blasted away with a choked scream. The impact sends him crashing through the floor as Kane notes how powerful the strike was. He casually asks the fallen Van if he learned anything. Shia catches her breath, relieved she managed to reach the control room. She stares at the divine artifact, unsure if she even has the right to use something so sacred. A sudden noise down the hall snaps her attention toward a group rushing in her direction. The guards realize the facility's systems are disabled and split up as one of them heads toward her location. She forces herself to focus and decides she has no time for hesitation, lifting the diadem to her head. A vision of her father echoes as he explains the artifact's nature as both a blessing and a burden. He continues by saying that the chosen can wield it with great fortune, but the unchosen will pay with their life. She insists that someone truly chosen would never be as weak as she is now. Kane's expression from earlier returns to her as he quietly asks for her protection. Remembering her promise to him strengthens her resolve. Golden light bursts outward as the artifact awakens and envelops her. Her eyes snap open with blazing clarity as new power fills her senses. Through heightened perception, she sees the battlefield outline and confirms Van's death. She also senses that Kane has fallen unconscious. She determines that she must eliminate the remaining enemies and carry Kane to safety before reinforcements arrive. The guards rush into the room and immediately notice it looks empty. Shia bursts from hiding and strikes the soldiers before they can react. She lands on the ground as both men fall. She pulls out a talisman and steals herself for the remaining enemies. Kane sees the same unsettling dream of a battlefield wherein he declares the world belongs to him. He calls Shia a thief and justifies death to be a reasonable result. Shia speaks with cold pity, claiming she feels sorry for those forced into villainy. Her calm expression hardens as she vows to kill him without hesitation. Kane meets her glare with a mocking smile and returns the threat. Shia commands her army to charge as the beast warriors surge forward behind her. Dark power rises around Kane as he lowers his gaze and prepares to test his opponent. A violent burst of force erupts across the field. Shia calls out his name as she closes in with overwhelming intent. She slams him to the ground and demands to know why he used his strength in such a reckless way. He lies there with a tired smile and accepts defeat once again. In reality, his body remains unconscious as Shia watches over him with concern. She realizes Nero will reach the second continent soon and that their device is useless now. She steps out of the cave to clear her head for a moment. She looks up and notices the moon is only half full. Despite the half moon, something about the air feels overwhelmingly like a full moon's pull. She lifts a mirror and realizes her eyes have truly transformed. A sudden voice casually comments on the weather as she spins around in shock. The rank 1 executive of Atla named Starfish speaks as if reminiscing about a distant memory. Shia demands to know why he has appeared and he explains he came after hearing of Van's death. His expression sharpens as he demands the whereabouts of Rain. She questions why Rain would travel here and he states that only a handful of people could have killed Van. He lists the 3 possible culprits. He names their organization's leader as one of them, the sword god of the 4th continent as another, and Ryan the supreme ruler of the 1st continent. He insists Ryan must be somewhere nearby, while she tells him he has reached the wrong conclusion and no such person is present. He accuses her of hiding the truth and claims she must have been given a false identity. Starfish storms in and orders her to leave as he barrels forward without slowing down. She whips around in shock, barely reacting before he slams into her with overwhelming force. He launches himself into the air and challenges Rain to come out and face him. He draws glowing power into his hand as if preparing a long-awaited strike. He unleashes his attack with murderous intent, determined to finally settle a score. Shia sees him preparing to kill and rushes forward to stop him, terrified for Cain inside. She darts toward him, pushing her exhausted body to move faster. He intercepts her mid-charge and lashes out again, furious that she keeps interfering. The impact explodes across the clearing and sends her flying through the debris. She struggles up in the smoke and realizes she survived only because of the divine artifact. The spear crashes down into the ground. Starfish retrieves his weapon with a calm ease, as if impressed she managed to avoid it. His eyes narrow as he reassesses the situation. He launches forward again and makes it clear she is not his target. The impact detonates against the barrier ahead. Shia sinks to her knees, devastated that she failed the one person who entrusted her with his safety. Debris shifts as clusters of stones pile up. Starfish notes the lack of response but knows a fighter of such caliber should not fall so easily. Shia forces herself to stand, fueled by rage and desperation. She charges at him and vows to kill him with whatever strength or methods she can muster. Starfish realizes that her sudden surge in power has changed the flow of the fight. She launches herself forward in a furious charge as a storm of spears rains down around her. Despite dodging with everything she has, the sheer number of attacks pushes her to the edge. Starfish raises his weapon and decides to end the exchange without restraint. A violent impact abruptly cuts off his momentum. The battlefield erupts as Cain's voice echoes about being in a bad mood. He steps forward and says he's had a bad dream and he needs to vent out his frustrations. Starfish recoils in shock, realizing that Cain is Rain's kid and that he should not be there. Cain's eyes narrow as Starfish questions how he's alive after being killed by Rain. The battlefield hushes as Shia calls out to Cain. Starfish panics and wonders if the Shrine Maiden's information was completely wrong. The maiden claimed that Cain was supposedly killed by his own grandfather. He realizes Reinhardt may have deceived everyone, including the Shrine Maiden. Starfish clenches his fist as he processes that Rein may not have exiled himself from guilt. He concludes that Rein probably lied to shield Cain, and adds that he's thought of a satisfying revenge for Cain. He vows to chop Cain's head off and deliver it as a tribute to Rain. Cain scoffs at Starfish's muttering and compares him to Van as he sizes him up. Watching the fight escalate, Shia panics at the danger Cain is stepping into. Cain thanks her softly for protecting him as she watches him stand between her and the enemy. She forces herself to accept that staying would only hold him back. She decides to trust him like she always has and let him handle the threat alone. Starfish mocks Cain's decision to fight one-on-one, insisting he cannot win. Cain smirks and reminds him that Van talked the same way moments before dying. Starfish challenges Cain to prove he can repeat that outcome. Cain bursts forward as glowing spears rain down around him. He swings through the barrage, cutting aside the attacks aimed at him. He notices the enemy's strange tactic as part of his blade begins to melt. Starfish grins as he realizes Cain has walked straight into his trap. Cain lunges forward but stumbles as his footing slips out from under him. He crashes hard into the ground as his balance completely gives way. Starfish bursts into laughter, thrilled by how easily Cain fell apart. He proudly names the overwhelming force as his trademark technique that destroys and absorbs any metal it touches. Cain clutches his wound as blood continues dripping uncontrollably. Starfish points out that even the iron in Cain's own blood cannot escape his power. He mocks Cain's shock by casually demonstrating how unreal his ability seems. He explains that he acquired such power to kill the tyrant Rain. Cain realizes the ability resembles the deep-sea treasure effect he once absorbed. He admits he cannot disassemble the spear mid-attack with his current speed. Faced with that limitation, he charges in with everything he has, hoping an early strike will give him a chance. His punch slams into the rising spikes, only to be stopped cold. A massive spiked orb forms above him and forces him back. Starfish morphs the field around them to attack and defend with ease, while Cain keeps searching for a gap. He notices a strange pattern forming in the shield. A grin slips out as he finally understands what he's looking at. He calls out the trick behind the shifting barrier, pointing out how the metal's strength is being redirected. He braces himself and decides to put that claim to the test. His body bursts into motion as he splits into swift afterimages that crisscross the battlefield. He finds the heart of the shield and aims towards it. He launches forward with a fierce punch that surges with raw force. His strike crashes into Starfish and sends debris flying in every direction. The impact blasts him straight into the ground. Cain steps back with a quiet exhale while steadying his hand. Starfish dusts himself off and remarks on the choice to switch to fists. Cain wonders if magic is the only thing that can hurt this creature, frowning as he remembers he has no mana left to rely on. He decides he has no choice but to use the sword that Kale forged. His pocket trembles as the mimic begins to rattle. He opens it and a bright green light bursts out. Cracks of energy spread across the object as he realizes it is the sign Kale warned him about. A vibrant green glow bursts from the blade as he lifts the newly awakened weapon. He stands tall with the shining sword in hand. Starfish stares in disbelief as the blade is leveled toward him. He sneers as he charges, certain that a simple stick will never stop him. The barrage rains down, only to be shattered by the sword's unexpected force. Starfish's confidence cracks as he realizes his silver spears are breaking apart. Cain rushes forward without giving him time to recover. In an instant, the blade carves through Starfish's arms before he can react. Shock fills his face as he tries to comprehend how he was injured so easily. Cain stands over him and mocks him that he fell under a wooden sword. Starfish warns that magic swords always demand a heavy price and assumes Cain paid with his own life to move that fast. Cain reacts with a casual grin as if the accusation is ridiculous since he is not holding a magic sword. Starfish scoffs and charges in to prove him wrong. He unleashes a fierce attack, convinced the fight is already over. Cain meets him head-on and reveals that he has never once fought at full strength in his entire life. He admits the reason is simple, since no sword has ever survived his true power. He smiles manically as he finally holds a blade that can endure his strength. He mockingly begs Starfish to withstand a single swing. The impact sends him landing in a powerful motion after the strike. The enemy's body starts to fall part after part. Cain exhales with a small smile and savors the feeling of swinging it at full power. He remembers his grandfather's words about the joy of wielding a sword and finally understands them. He grips the hilt tighter as the realization settles in completely. He steadies himself and decides to search the defeated enemy for any useful information. He crouches down and reaches for the small data chip, ready to examine it. As he bends forward to analyze it, fatigue suddenly overwhelms him. His vision swims and he stumbles. He forces himself upright while acknowledging the blood loss and the toll that technique took on him. Shia rushes over and panics at the sight of his injury as he weakly holds up the chip for her to take. Cain collapses again as Shia rushes toward him in a panic. Far away, a madman revels in the chaos he has unleashed upon the world. Cain taunts a woman known for her pursuit of truth named Serena, while she steps in with open hostility. She declares their intent to take him down and fix what he has ruined. She confronts him face to face, refusing to bend despite his smug confidence. He mocks her boldness, unleashing a surge of dark power and roaring for her to try if she dares. Serena rallies her forces and charges into what she believes is the final battle. The clash detonates in a massive shockwave. The battlefield collapses into chaos as bodies and debris are hurled through the air. Serena crashes to the ground, coughing as she tries to force herself back up. She furiously wonders why so many had to die because of someone like him. Rage floods her mind as she imagines tearing Cain apart if she could ever turn back time. A sharp gasp jolts Cain awake from the darkness. He realizes he is inside an inn. He notices the divine artifact has taken root into Shia properly. As he gathers himself, he wonders if Shia treated his wounds while still unable to shake the lingering dream. The memory of that vision feels heavier than before, growing clearer and more terrifying. He starts to wonder if such a future awaits him. Shia stirs and complains about falling asleep again. They confirm that contact with the second continent failed because Atla disrupted their communication codes and rendered the device useless. Faced with a lack of options and limited time, Shia worries that reaching anyone in time is impossible without a code or transport. Cain moves from the bed and asks for the communication device. Shia asks what code he's inputting, but he tells her he'll find out soon enough. A familiar voice comes through the device, catching Shia off guard as recognition dawns. The call reveals her father on the other end, his fury erupting as he demands answers from Rhine. In the second continent's palace, Shia's father furiously questions why Rhine stole their divine artifact. He brings up the unsettling letter Rain left behind as proof, revealing that he only borrowed the artifact and entrusted them to protect the communication device. Her father pushes for a response and grows even angrier just as Shia's voice connects. Shia jumps in and nervously reveals that she is the one holding the communicator. She asks for privacy before continuing, and he confirms he is truly alone in the chamber. She tells him that they cannot afford having anyone else listen to her. Later, he covers his face in frustration as he realizes the enemy is already moving and blames himself for noticing too late. He praises her efforts and she redirects the credit. Cain suddenly covers her mouth before she can say anything more. She then hurriedly insists that her brother is not the traitor and begs for him not to be imprisoned. Her father tells her not to worry about it and demands to know how she obtained the communication device. Shia stammers out a fake device disconnection and apologizes for ending the call. Kane admits he barely managed to deceive the Beast King this time about Rain's grandson stealing the artifact. He decides it's time to explain everything to Shia. The revelation shocks her as she processes that he is directly connected to Rain. The resemblance makes sense to her now, and it becomes clear that the grandfather revealed himself to her on purpose. She argues that the truth could be explained calmly since the artifact was meant to be returned, but he shuts that down. The Beast King's short temper and love for battle make it obvious he would chase the artifact without hearing any explanation. They then decide to test out the chip from Starfish. As the device boots up, he begins reviewing the information while she watches closely. The footage reveals Serena, who pursues truth. She's a powerful witch from the third continent who is connected with Kane. He wonders why she would be in Starfish's chip and decides to look further. They pull up her profile and confirm her identity as Serena, a critical figure tied to the machine tower. He wonders why Atla would suddenly start digging into her actions when nothing was supposed to happen yet. He recalls that her first recorded appearance should still be years away and that she already rules the machine tower. As he scrolls deeper, a shocking entry claims that he himself is supposed to be dead. He recalls Starfish's words about being killed by Rain. He pushes the confusion aside and decides to copy everything before worrying about the contradiction. Midway through the transfer, he freezes. The updated report states that the third continent shows no signs of invasion at all. They conclude that the Starfish data must be more current and reliable than the monitoring station's report. Further records show that Atla's stolen machinery was swiftly recovered, leaving little time for intelligence leaks. Shia wonders who could have possibly turned the tide so perfectly, and Kane briefly considers his grandfather before dismissing the thought. Kane calmly lays out a plan that starts with eliminating key figures who remain tied to the central continent. He identifies the true threat as the mysterious leader of Atla. No one knows anything about this leader, only that he is called the Absolute One. When asked if he could face that being, Kane admits that a direct encounter right now would almost certainly end in his death. He recalls Rain's warning and the note that foretold his fate at Atla's hands. Accepting the weight of that prophecy, Kane considers what must change if the future is to be defied. Kane suddenly remembers something he meant to return to Shia. He hands back the talisman meant to heighten his senses she once gave him. Shia checks the talisman in confusion, realizing it never activated despite appearing intact. Kane admits he does not fully understand why, though he quietly suspects it has something to do with his own condition. Back then, all his senses were suppressed, which forced him to rely on sounds to indicate his position. Shia finally understands his struggles at the time and apologizes for misunderstanding him. As the night grows late, the two decide to rest and prepare to move out early the next day. A formal report begins detailing the destruction of Atla's central headquarters and confirms the deaths of several high-ranking figures. To investigate the ruined headquarters, multiple mid-level executives are dispatched to the scene. Contact with the investigation team is lost midway, and all members are later confirmed dead on site. The report concludes that the same individual behind Van's death was responsible, and that this was no accident. While requesting reinforcement from higher authorities, the investigator realizes too late that Kane is already behind him. Kane strikes decisively from the rear, cutting down the investigator before he can react. Despite the chaos and bloodshed, a final transmission is successfully sent out. Night settles quietly over the forest. Reports later state that all of Atla's executives were eliminated swiftly and with almost no resistance. A figure smiles and realizes that if the enemy is truly that powerful, he needs to witness that strength with his own eyes. A few days later in the central port, Kane explains that the remaining executives are expected to pass through the port, so waiting there is the safest option. From above, the long pier and docked ships show how easy it would be for targets to blend into the crowd. Kane calmly assures her that he will recognize them the moment they appear. When she asks about the sacred ring, Kane starts to explain its purpose but hesitates. A sudden sensation hits him as he recalls an overwhelming aura he has felt before. He sees the sword god and Ryu standing beside someone else. That presence manifests as a massive black aura, twisting violently and unlike anything he has ever encountered. The sword god's eyes sharpen as he turns and leaps away. He greets Kane from behind, noting that it has been a month since. Kane realizes that the sword god was the one observing him back in the village. The sword god studies him closely and wonders what kind of plan he could be hiding. He looks at Kane and Shia, noting that he doesn't see anyone suspicious around. Still, he wonders why Kane would need to observe him if he's not part of Atla. Kane reassures him and claims he came without malice. Instead of explaining further, Ryu suddenly bolts forward and dismisses his words outright. She points out how close they are to the docks and concludes there is no way this meeting is a coincidence. Kane recognizes her immediately, along with Shia and Serena. These women tied to the stars are those he is destined to fall in love with. Ryu moves to attack, convinced that they must be connected to Atla despite his master's warning. The figure from earlier named Sean arrives, and Cain immediately notices that there are no signs of transformation magic or disguise. Even so, Sean's true form leaks through, which leaves Cain disturbed by how such overwhelming evil can be hidden. Sean chastises Ryu's impatience, while Cain wonders if he's hiding magic subtle enough to evade even his perception. Cain accepts that the misunderstanding is inevitable and suggests he can clear their doubts by revealing proof. He formally introduces himself and declares his lineage as the first prince of his kingdom of the first continent. The sudden revelation shocks everyone present, drawing stunned reactions from all sides. The sword god inspects the emblem Cain presents and demands confirmation of his claim. Cain reveals the mimic as a strange gift received from his grandfather. With the evidence revealed, the sword god relaxes and admits the situation was a misunderstanding. Apologies follow as Cain is acknowledged as royalty and the tension briefly dissolves. Sean smiles warmly and steps forward, offering a polite introduction. In an instant, blood splashes across the scene as Sean is struck down. The group reacts in shock as Cain suddenly attacks him. Ryu snaps with fury, teeth clenched as rage overtakes any sense of restraint. She charges forward recklessly, leaping toward Cain. Cain knocks her aside and asks for her to hear him out. She stands back up and refuses to listen as she lunges once more. Cain declares that the man being protected is not who they think he is. He tells them that Sean is Atla's leader. The sword god steps in and intercepts Ryu's blade before it can reach her target. The sword god insists that if Cain must die, he will be the one to carry that burden himself. When Ryu protests, a dark aura surrounds the sword god and tells her not to make him repeat himself. The sudden tension snaps everyone's focus as shock ripples. He steps forward and confronts Cain directly as he admits he found nothing suspicious on Sean's body. He challenges Cain to explain what proof he has to accuse his disciple of being Atla's leader. Cain tells him that he cannot explain it. The sword god's gaze hardens as he condemns the decision to kill without evidence and questions the values Cain was raised with. Without hesitation, he launches into an attack and tells Cain to apologize to Sean in the afterlife. Cain narrowly reacts as he realizes that if he fails to stop this strike, his life will end here. A column of violent lightning tears through Cain's heart. He then suddenly feels a faint but unmistakable return of mana stirring within his body. The sword god lunges again as Cain realizes he can trace the flow of mana and anticipate the strike. Their weapons collide in a thunderous crash. The girls freeze as Cain manages to halt the master's sword head-on. A familiar sense of dread grips Cain as memories of the forest resurface. The sword god starts to recognize that Cain is far from ordinary after being able to stop his sword. He commits to a decisive charge with the intent to end the fight. The sword god's severed arm suddenly flies as a voice calls out for him to stop. The arm lands heavily before a pair of boots. The man who Cain claims to be the leader of Alta suddenly stands and declares that Cain's head is his. Cain recalls a conversation where Rain warned him about Alta and its leader, whose true nature remains completely unknown. Rain hinted that some futures should never have existed and that fate had already begun to twist. He grips a cup as the weight of that warning sinks in and caution becomes unavoidable. Back in the battlefield, Cain stands before the leader. He steadies himself and remembers how Rain's advice allowed him to perceive the presence of the Absolute One. He discovers that Sean used an unfamiliar power to hide himself and possessed something as unnatural as immortality. Ryu asks if the sword god had been put under a spell, while he merely acknowledges that the man before them is not Sean. Sean declares himself as the same beloved student that the sword god has been teaching for 11 years. He narrates memories from years ago when training injuries and reckless growth were part of their shared past. He remembers an even earlier time when Ryu was young and drawing her first map on a pillow. He then recalls the moment the sword god found him injured and alone on the roadside. The memory cuts to his present resolve. He reveals that every moment of guidance and care was only a mask and crafted to prepare for this inevitable betrayal. Doubt and shock ripple through the sword god. He moves in an instant and acknowledges that Cain was being truthful from the start. The two collide in a violent mid-air exchange as blades and bodies crash together in a flurry of relentless blows. Sean praises how amazing the sword god's intuition is. He then mocks the same intuition he praised for not being able to uncover the truth he had been hiding. It becomes clear to the sword god that he no longer has the strength to overcome Sean. He then urgently tells Cain and the others to escape. He holds his blade up and declares he will hold Sean off to buy time. Ryu calls out in panic, while Cain simply acknowledges his decision. A violent blast shatters as he faces off against Sean. He entrusts his school and continent to Ryu. She bolts off with Cain as she silently acknowledges the sword god's words. Sean turns to them and vows that running away will not free them from his grasp. The sword god then lunges at him and reminds him that he is his opponent. The clash erupts in a collision as they swing blades. Sean drives in harder and insists on a fair fight to prove he meets his master's expectations. The sword god snaps and silences Sean as he brings his blade down. Sean reels from the impact and chokes out a breath as the blow lands cleanly. Steel pierces through his body as his eyes widen. He drops to his knees and admits through grit that this is exactly what he expected from the sword god. The sword god studies him and notes that even a direct strike to the heart was not enough to kill him. The realization hits that a sword alone may not be enough to end this. Sean smiles and asks what he plans to do next as power gathers in his hand. Cracks of energy spread above him as he challenges whether even this power can be stopped. A massive chunk of earth ignites as it hurtles downward. The blazing mass slams into the ground in a violent explosion. It crashes down from the sky as the group sprints, and Ryu calls out in alarm for her master. Cain looks up in shock as he realizes exactly what is falling toward them. The sword god stares ahead in silence, already understanding the situation. A memory surfaces from decades ago as he recalls being a disciple himself and learning that strength without restraint only leads to death. He remembers his master warning him to never lower his guard. Lying wounded in the dirt, he recalls surviving by clinging to that lesson and refusing to die unfinished. He accepted that keeping his guard up became his life's rule and the price of his own carelessness. He concludes that believing in Sean also means taking responsibility for ending him if necessary. He declares that he will unleash his sword for his disciple's sake. Ryu screams in desperation as she realizes what he is about to do. His grip tightens, his eyes sharpening as he commits fully to the swing. The blade splits straight down through Sean. The sword god immediately leaps away before the falling debris can hit him. Ryu expresses her relief over his victory, but Cain urges her to leave immediately. As they scramble across the roof, Cain tells her that Sean isn't dead yet. Below, the sword god senses Sean's presence vanishes and questions where he fled. Then he suddenly reappears behind him, mocking the idea that such power could come from a single arm. The sword god's eyes widen when he realizes that his sword is unable to cut through Sean's mana. Sean declares that no divine sword can stop his power. He reveals this magic exists solely to counter such ideas. The shockwave tears across the rooftops. Sean looks down at the battered sword god and notes that he is still clinging to life. He raises his blade with calm confidence, clearly intending to finish the fight without delay. His expression twists in shock as a sudden attack pierces him sideways. He recovers quickly and realizes his opponent concealed their presence through careful magic. Ryu steps forward with disgust as he calls out her name. Shia appears and reacts in alarm as all her talismans ignited at once. He mocks their choice to return instead of fleeing, while Ryu internally admits that he trusted Cain's plan. Earlier, he had asked Ryu if she would take the chance to save the sword god. The sword god vanishes from his position while Sean admits he never expected Cain to return. Cain kneels beside the sword god as he tries to heal him. Sean provokes him, but Cain tells him he already knows why Sean is after him. He appears before Sean and grabs him by the neck as he taunts the idea that Sean only wants to be Cain. He grins as he calls himself the true Absolute One. A cascade of visions floods in, showing countless possible lives where Cain was both destroyer and king. He stood as the Absolute One in most of those dreams. He would rain down meteors and wield void itself as he succeeded through the power of creation. He recalls forging an army of living weapons and possessing immortality himself. He descended like a god of destruction that demanded prayers before annihilation. And now, all that overwhelming power has gathered into Sean. Cain feels the authority of the Absolute returning to him as if the power itself is recognizing its original wielder once again. Sean lashes out about his weakening power just by being close to Cain. He slips past Cain's grip and leaps away. He declares he will tear Cain apart before he can even take another breath. Dark creations pour out from his spell as they descend on Cain from above. Cain cuts through them and questions if this is truly the extent of Sean's power. Sean smirks in response, clearly unfazed. The black beasts regenerate and lunge again. Cain realizes they refuse to stay dead no matter how many times they are destroyed. Sean reveals he granted them the principles of immortality and division, meaning killing them only causes them to split apart instead. The pack regroups as their numbers spiral out of control. Cain realizes he is facing creation magic at its highest level, where new laws are imposed onto reality itself. He calls out to Shia to produce a spell, but she admits she cannot seal the monsters after losing her talismans earlier in the fight. He tells the others to retreat while he stays behind instead. He braces himself, carefully avoiding actions that would cause the creatures to split further. The wolves surge again, and Cain fails to reduce their numbers. He then senses a deeper power driving them. He recalls the 4 fundamental energies that govern creation. Drawing on that knowledge, he releases a focused surge meant to fracture the enemy's rune structure at its core. As the magic collapses, buried memories resurface, and he recognizes this force as the creation power that once belonged to him alone. Sean realizes that his own creations are now being used as conduits for that stolen power, but he tells her that, just as Cain has come to understand him, Sean has unknowingly begun to understand him as well. Cain admits that his mana is insufficient and that he can only cancel his magic a limited number of times. He also realizes that unless the sword god is dealt with or forced into retreat, their chances remain slim. He reflects that the spell he used enforces death, but allows revival until its effect fully ends. He acknowledges that he cannot erase the sword god's death principle, but he may still bend it just enough for the elixir to work. He decides that before anything else, he must first deal with Sean, but Ryu suddenly appears before him. She hands a talisman to him as he utters surprisingly. She tells her that Shia is done preparing the talisman for sealing. He acknowledges both their efforts, and he signals that he will give the cue to act the instant his mark appears. One of the monsters erupts and roars. A massive wave of darkness pours downward like a collapsing wall towards Cain. He identifies the moment the creatures split as their weakness and targets the tiny fissure that forms between them. Raising his blade high, he channels energy as light gathers at the tip. He dives straight in a focused plunge and drives a column of power through the pack. The impact detonates across the building. He calls out to Shia as the remaining shadows recoil and scatter around him. Talisman papers burst outward and latch onto the creatures. Shia forms a glowing seal between her hands. The barrier settles over the battlefield as the sealing ritual is completed. Cain uses the opening to dash away and briefly acknowledges Shia while moving at full speed. Sean snaps to attention as Cain lunges. He makes it clear he has no intention of letting Cain leave so easily. Ryu lunges in as she challenges Sean and prepares to counter. Sean charges straight through and knocks Ryu back. Sean leaps away and lunges forward again. He and Cain sprint with undeniable speed, teeth clenched and eyes locked. The two men race towards the sword god's body. A sudden grip catches Cain's arm mid-sprint. Sean appears before him and locks him in place. Confident that the fight is already decided, his expression suddenly shifts as something feels wrong. Instead of fading, Cain remains standing and begins pulling something from Sean. Sean's thoughts spiral back to years ago when he first awakened this overwhelming power and felt its weight. He recalls learning the truth behind it, staring at his hands as he realizes the power was never truly hers. The true source of the Absolute has always been Cain, and he refuses to let the power return to him. He clenches his fist, convinced that killing Cain is the only option left. The memory continues with years spent building networks and searching relentlessly, all centered on finding Cain. Back in the present, realization hits that Cain's existence alone denies Sean any chance at victory. Panic spikes as he lashes out to create distance, desperate to escape before any more of his power is taken. A complex spell ignites and space folds inward as he attempts to flee through forced displacement. The escape fails instantly when he is struck mid-transition. The sword god appears to have struck him as he reflects that life and death were never separated by clear lines. He declares that without boundaries, there is nothing his blade cannot cut. Sean reels back in shock, realizing he was wounded even after shifting positions and deciding he must retreat. He tries to escape while acknowledging that erasing their memories was supposed to end this. Cain's eyes narrow at him. He descends from above as he condemns the thief for daring to covet his power. The others freeze in alarm as they watch Cain. Terror spreads across Sean's face as he recognizes Cain's power as the true Absolute. Cain announces judgment and promises punishment worthy of every sin committed. He calmly tells Sean to prepare himself as power gathers. A pillar of divine fire crashes down from the heavens and aims towards Sean. Flames pour down from above and reshape the battlefield into a raging inferno. Cain declares that resisting him is impossible, especially when Sean is an imposter who cannot even utilize half of Cain's true power. He clamps down on his face as Sean screams and realizes that Cain is absorbing his power. When Cain lets him go, he concludes that no matter how hard he struggled, this outcome was inevitable. Sean then starts laughing manically. He snarls Cain's name and vows that reclaiming absolute fate will make him regret everything. He states that with his power, escaping destiny is impossible since it was a curse from the start. Still grinning, he insists this will not be the end for him and reaches toward his head. His body disintegrates into ash and embers, swallowed completely by the flames. Cain dismisses his last resistance as meaningless words. The flames die down as he looks aside in silence, the battle already fading from his thoughts. His attention snaps elsewhere, and his eyes close for a brief moment. From the darkness, a shadowy presence rises and demands acceptance. Cain's absolute form appears and tells him that they are one. He calls out to Cain and tempts him with the promise of absolute creation. Cain realizes that the power of creation will be his if he takes the shadow's hand. He recalls Ryan's words from before that no one but himself has the ability to control such power, In a sudden flash, he cuts through the shadow instead of taking his hand. The severed darkness recoils and questions why Cain would reject the power. Cain admits he only borrowed that power for a moment to end Sean. He orders the presence to disappear and condemns it as a blight upon the world. Flames coil around him as he returns to the real world. The portal vanishes as his allies rush towards him in relief. He tells them that the Absolute One has finally fallen. In heaven, Ryan watches the real world through the pond's water and realizes that Cain wasn't swallowed up by his power. He smiles to himself, convinced that his own final decision was the correct one. A winged woman suddenly appears and observes that Ryan's smile comes not just from his face but from his soul. Sitting together, she reveals that she has been watching all along because his soul was too vivid to ignore. The woman reflects a reckoning where sorrow, anger, joy, and regret all fade into the realization that everything unfolded as it needed to. Ryan smiles and states he no longer has any reason to kill Cain. He stands up and tells her that he's going to give his final gift to Cain. The woman reflects Ryan and recognizes him as someone burdened by countless hidden truths. Her head turns when Ryan suddenly calls her Nephilim. He entrusts Cain's future to her and asks her to place Cain in her care when he finally reaches heaven. With a knowing smile, she confirms that this request was the sole purpose of Ryan telling her everything. She reassures him that she will guide Cain properly, and he nods in trusting approval. In the real world, Cain lies in bed, stirring from sleep. He wakes up groggy and realizes he must have blacked out again as he pulls himself upright. He notices his belongings neatly placed on the table beside him. He reaches out for the lashing mimic and reassures it that he's all right. He pauses when he notices something else. He stares at a newfound letter in quiet confusion. He sits on the bed and reads the letter prepared as guidance for the moment he survived the Absolute One. The letter instructs him to look into the mimic to find the last words of Rain for him. Before he can process everything, Ryu enters the room and greets him awake. She checks on his condition and casually reveals that he has been unconscious for days. As Cain reacts to the lost time, the door opens again and Shia and the Sword God rush in after sensing he woke up. The Sword God confirms that nothing seems physically wrong with him. The mood turns serious when he confronts Cain with how they witnessed his transformation into the Absolute One. He questions Cain's connection with the renowned villain. Cain finally explains that his sudden change was caused by a side effect from absorbing the Absolute One's mana. The group reacts in shock as the realization sinks in that he took on the power directly. Cain calmly admits it is a core part of his strength now and reassures them that the source is gone. The Sword God laughs it off and decides not to pry further, acknowledging that Cain has secrets of his own. The group expresses relief as they make multiple reports about Atla being wiped out and spies across the continent having fled. Cain bows his head in gratitude for handling everything while he was unconscious. Ryu and the Sword God formally express thanks on behalf of the neighboring territories and apologize for their earlier rudeness. The Sword God promises to repay the debt one day with his name and sword. The group leaves to allow Cain to rest even further. He then asks his chest box to bring out the mimic and the tablet. Cain wonders what his grandfather wanted to tell him as he activates the tablet. The system finishes loading and pulls him fully into the stored information. He finds himself standing alone in a virtual space as the system recognizes him. The system announces that it will begin playing recordings left by the previous user. The scene shifts to the fourth world, and Cain freezes when he recognizes his grandfather in the projection. The recording shows a failed world and a desperate attempt to stop Cain from awakening as the Absolute One. Rain admits that blood ties and Cain's innocence as a child stayed his hand and led to catastrophe. Rain vows that next time he will not hesitate. The vision ends in a violent explosion, sealing the recording with a chilling finality. The recording shifts to another failed timeline where flames swallow the land as Cain stands atop the ruins. Ryan reflects that killing Cain as a child would only lead to another version of him appearing again. He realizes that even taking a young life cannot stop the collapse, and that a different solution is needed. The scene changes to a quieter world where Rain continues his journey in search of truth. He admits that after countless attempts, he finally uncovered 3 destinies deeply tied to Cain. The vision reveals 3 figures bound by light, conviction, and foresight, each carrying a path meant to oppose Cain. In one world, those 3 succeed in reaching their potential and bring Cain down at the cost of everything. Though only a few survive, Ryan believes their perseverance will eventually lead to salvation. The 99th world shows that no matter the struggle, Cain always rises again as if fate itself has chosen him. Ryan concludes that whether they fought desperately or did nothing at all, the world always met the same end. He questions if all his efforts across countless worlds were meaningless. With no hope left, he resolves that he has only one final chance remaining. The system transitions to the 100th world as Rain reflects on everything learned through 99 failed timelines. He decides that the best choice must now be made. He believes the best move left is to kill baby Cain. He convinces himself that even if another Cain appears later, it would still be preferable. The child stirs and cries as the blade nears. Rain's eyes widen and he freezes at the sight. He tries to convince himself not to hesitate and reminds himself of the disaster that the child can bring. As the memories of the other worlds surface, his thoughts echo of having to kill the child. The weight of the other worlds presses down on his choice. The blade slips from his grasp and strikes the floor. He turns away as hesitation cracks through his resolve. In that moment, Cain lied smiling in his bed, reaching out with the unguarded innocence of a child. Later, Rain declared the terrible fate that awaits Cain. A younger Cain listens in silence as the prophecy expands to the destruction of every continent by his hand. Rain gently addresses him as he approaches. Cain looks up as Rain frames destiny as something no force can truly escape. Hand in hand, Rain leads Cain forward with the promise of forging him into someone strong. The system confirms that all stored recordings have finished and the playback fully shuts down. Cain wonders if what he saw were fragments of his grandfather's 99 past lives. Doubt creeps in as he questions whether the figure haunting his dreams was truly himself or only a possible future. A final prompt appears, revealing that a personal message was left behind for him. Rain appears and reveals that his foresight came not from prophecy but from living through 99 futures. He explains that hiding the truth was a form of self-protection meant to prevent irreversible collapse. He warns that once Cain had embraced the role of evil, there would have been no turning back. Rain explains that he hid the truth until he was sure Cain wouldn't be evil. He is told to listen carefully as the destruction of the world is revealed to have already been decided by fate, regardless of what has happened so far. The vision shifts to a ruined future where someone else takes Cain's place and dies bearing the burden of a collapsing world meant for him. Rain urges him to grow stronger and defeat the second absolute that will inevitably appear again. Cain hears a final affirmation of trust as the virtual space shuts down. Back in his room, Cain reflects that the fate of a great villain and his own destiny are now inseparably tied. He closes his eyes quietly and accepts the weight of what has been entrusted to him. The sword god gathers everyone at the table and warns them to prepare themselves as troubling news begins to surface from afar. He reveals that the second continent's capital and royal family have fallen. Shia jolts from her seat as the weight of the announcement sinks in. The capital is now sealed by powerful magic, with all contact to the Thunder Emperor abruptly severed. Realizing the gravity of the situation, panic starts to rise as the implications grow more terrifying by the second. Shia spirals into panic as she imagines the worst, convinced her family should have reached the capital by now and fearing they may already be gone. She's pulled back to the present as Cain tries to steady her and urges her to calm down. They reassure her that the Beast King is not someone who would fall easily and that her family is safer than she fears. The group then plans to move quickly, which surprises Shia that the sword god is coming with. She hesitates and asks whether unresolved issues with the sword gate should come first. She's told there's no urgency since the Absolute One is already dead and Atla has fallen as well. With matters seemingly settled, the group prepares to move as Shia realizes that Cain is coming too. She softens and offers her thanks to everyone. Later, their airship starts to fly in the sky. Cain watches as the sword god releases a powerful presence and senses that he has grown far stronger. Cain then tells him that he witnessed the final battle clearly and praises the decisive strike that helped end it. He admits he was dazed but was still able to see it. He reflects that the swing erased all boundaries as if life and death, time and space briefly lost their meaning. The sword god reacts in surprise that Cain was able to comprehend such a move. He realizes Cain already grasped the essence of the blade and the boundary between life and death far earlier than expected. Cain presses for a clearer explanation of the boundary he mentioned. A sudden presence tears through the sky as the sword god identifies it as a sky dragon. A massive blue dragon reveals itself overhead, flooding the air with overwhelming mana. The girls appear in alarm as they question if they're under attack due to the mana they felt. The sword god tells them it's the sky dragon. The dragon then approaches their ship. Panic spreads as they realize that the dragon is right in front of them, even as it signals no immediate hostility. The dragon explains its arrival as one of respect and unfinished ties with Shia's family, though its surprise at finding Cain here is clear. Locking eyes with Cain, the dragon names him as the Apostle of the Apocalypse. It questions whether it should start calling Cain a singularity now. The dragon proposes a conversation with Cain. The birds above them suddenly seem to halt. Time itself seems to halt as the world freezes around Cain. The dragon declares Cain's transformation complete and marks him as a singular being whose role in the apocalypse has fundamentally changed. Cain quietly realizes the one who caused this shift must have been his grandfather. The dragon admits it cannot foresee whether this new path will become a blessing or a curse. It prepares to act as the consequences of that uncertainty loom. A green crystal forms within the dragon's head as power gathers. The crystal drifts towards Shia as the dragon declares its intent to watch him through her. The energy sinks into Shia as the dragon commands her awake. It explains it broke the silence early, while Shia struggles to grasp what is happening. It reveals a land blessed by heaven is racing toward destruction. The airship is caught in swirling winds as the sky dragon turns away. It casts a spell before departing. The group jolts awake in pain as the sudden relocation leaves everyone sprawled and disoriented. They realize they are no longer on the airship and that the dragon moved them elsewhere. Ryu reacts in shock about his conversation with the dragon, which makes him realize that not everyone could hear it. Ryu points out that dragons exist beyond human affairs and rarely interfere. Her words suspend in the air as people outside start to talk about being careful of thieves. Kane suggests that they move outside for now. After leaving the room owner peeks through and wonders if he left the window open. The two walk down the town square and notice their companions are missing. They assess the unfamiliar continent and note how calm it feels compared to the supposedly sealed second continent. Ryu pauses at a busy food stall as a vendor proudly shows off his cooking. The vendor offers them a taste and Ryu cheerfully asks where they are. The vendor identifies the town in the second continent, surprised that they're unaware. Kane pokes Ryu as she talks to the vendor. He tells her that they truly are in the second continent as they spot Shia's family's castle. Ryu recalls hearing that the town was isolated due to abnormal mana, while the vendor casually suggests the rumors may have just come from children. Both of them lower their voices as they quietly question what is really happening. Kane dismisses the idea of a false rumor and reveals that this information came directly from the Heavenly Emperor and the Sky Dragon. Kane grows visibly concerned as he wonders why no one in the city knows about the isolation. Ryu reacts with disbelief as Kane explains the possibility of a mental barrier preventing the people inside from noticing anything unusual. He explains that while a barrier of that scale is technically possible, sorcerers are too rare for it to be realistic on this continent. As they approach the city gates, guards abruptly stop them and declare the area beyond the capital restricted. The guards insist the region is off-limits and firmly refuse to let them pass outside the capital walls. One guard mockingly questions their common sense as he implies that nothing exists beyond the continent itself. Kane pushes back as the guard claims that leaving the capital changes nothing at all. With unsettling conviction, the guard proclaims that the second continent and the world are one and the same. The declaration echoes across the walls as the guards repeat the words. They start to move quietly through the trees as the guards patrol the stone walls above. Leaves rustle as attention shifts upward. Kane reaches his finger out to the air as if to test something invisible in it. His hand collides with unseen resistance as he confirms that a solid barrier is suspended in the air around them. He tells Ryu that the barrier exists even if its nature remains unclear. Kane suggests finding Shia and the Sword God first since they may know something about the barrier. They decide their next move is to return to town and investigate the situation properly. At a market stall, the mention of Shia's name catches the attention of a vendor. The vendor tells them that Shia has been dead for 10 years. A small informant explains that the woman they encountered was likely an imposter recently taken into custody. He explains that the fake princess had broken into the castle, which led to her arrest and imprisonment by the Beast King. Kane quietly concludes that the Beast King's memories must have been altered, meaning the so-called fake princess is likely the real Shia. The pair leave while deciding to investigate further, prompting concern about whether they intend to rescue Shia from the castle prison. When asked how they plan to do it, Kane calmly assures her that there is no need to worry because a hidden route already exists. He runs his fingers along the wall and locates the concealed mechanism hidden within the stone. Revealing a strange divine artifact, he activates it. He unlocks the passage as the wall opens to reveal a hidden stairway beneath the castle. The two descend into the secret corridor, where he explains that the artifact is a divine tool capable of linking spaces, and that this hidden route was created during a past invasion of the castle 10 years ago. She dismisses her concern about the invasion and assures her that it is merely a family matter. They slip through the hidden opening and Kane reveals that the passage connects directly to the castle's underground warehouse. They quietly move through the storage area as Kane explains that the prison is only a short distance away. Their tension spikes when the Beast King confronts them head-on and mistakes them for thieves. He concludes that the earlier chaos involving the fake princess was merely a diversion. The Beast King takes control of the situation and orders his guards to secure the surroundings while he handles this alone. Kane realizes he cannot match the Beast King's strength without relying on his mana and tries to de-escalate. His attempt to reason is cut short as the Beast King launches a sudden attack. The powerful strike doesn't meet a target. The Beast King shows sharp awareness and acknowledges Kane's evasion. Ryu erupts over the ambush and the unexpected hostility from the Beast King himself. The Beast King mocks them, amused that those who trespassed into his castle dare to judge him at all. His killing intent spikes as his rage fully surfaces as he makes clear that forgiveness is not an option. Heat and pressure flood the space as his blood surges violently. He activates a beastman-only technique that accelerates blood circulation and amplifies his physical power. The Beast King launches a lethal strike as Cain realizes there is no room to evade. He recalls a defensive principle that allows any attack to be deflected through precise control and form. He redirects the blow with perfect timing as he prepares to parry with a circle. He spins away in a fluid motion. Then, Cain quickly launches a counterattack. The Beast King sneers and questions whether Cain's level of skill is truly enough. He declares that mercy is no longer an option for anyone who trespassed into his domain. The Beast King launches a relentless flurry of blows and forces Cain to brace himself. Cain realizes he cannot keep up with the pace and decides that enduring the attacks is his only option. A strike lands cleanly, then the Beast King closes in. Convinced this exchange will be the end for Cain, a sharp warning rings out as Cain is commanded to drop his stance at the last possible moment. Ryu appears and casts a circle to block the Beast King's attack. The Beast King notices her blade and recognizes it. Red energy starts to flow from her sword. Cain makes it clear that facing the Beast King alone is not an option right now. Ryu launches herself away and assures Cain that she's able to handle it. Ryu clashes head-on with the Beast King and meets his overwhelming force, but his sweeping blow sends her reeling immediately. Cain realizes in shock that she is holding her own against the Beast King, even though her swordsmanship should not work on him. Ryu stands back up to meet the Beast King's attack with blood flow, even though it should have been impossible for a non-beastman to wield it. A violent impact erupts between them. Cain questions whether she had been concealing her true strength all along, but her answer offers no clear explanation. She admits she does not fully understand it either, only that her body suddenly feels lighter and her movements instinctively align. Cain watches closely and wonders if her sudden awakening is connected to the mysterious barrier surrounding the city. The Beast King notices her sword and senses something unsettlingly familiar about it. He presses for answers and Ryu reveals that she was trained by the sword god. Hearing the name of her master, the Beast King pauses in disbelief as he struggles to recall how he knew the name. He presses further and questions how her master is connected to his royal bloodline. His gaze sharpens as he focuses on the blade in her hands, recognizing a shape that should only exist in royal legend. Power surges around him as he declares the sword to be the lost royal blade of his family and demands to know how an outsider obtained it. Before she can respond, a crushing presence spreads through the battlefield. Even the beast soldiers outside falter as an overwhelming pressure washes over them. The sword god steps forth, surrounded by flowing energy, calmly revealing that he did not expect the others to arrive first. The Beast King narrows his eyes as irritation breaks through. He acknowledges Ryu's strength and pieces together that the one who just arrived must be her master. The sword god realizes that the Beast King does not recognize him. The group tenses as the sword god studies them closely. He notes that their lack of surprise means they already understand the situation. The sword god orders them to move ahead and rescue Shia while he stays behind to deal with the Beast King. Enraged by the dismissal, the Beast King's pride snaps as his killing intent surges outward. Crimson energy coils violently around the Beast King as he prepares to chase them down. The sword god blocks the path and urges the others to escape as they charge through the doorway. The pair pushes past the guards, waiting outside as the Beast King orders them to stop the two. Ryu notes that the building sounds like it's about to collapse, while Cain guesses that it must be the sword god's doing. They decide to move fast before the damage worsens and Shia is put at risk. An hour later, they arrive at a massive cracked wall with Shia. She leads them through the breach and reassures them that only those she trusts know this place and that it is safe. Ryu volunteers to fetch the master, confident they have found a secure location nearby. After regrouping in the cavern, the situation is calmly summarized so everyone understands what unfolded. The master reflects that their survival was no accident and credits the Sky Dragon for leading them here. Attention turns to priorities as they agree the barrier must be investigated next with Shia's insight. Shock spreads when she reveals that the barrier was created by a single individual. She recalls entering the continent and witnessing the core of the barrier firsthand. A massive layered magic formation activates, and within its overwhelming glow, a lone human figure can be seen standing at the center. The group gathers as Shia explains that its structure follows yin-yang and the 5 elements. She points out the exact center of the formation and notes the immediate presence of mana annihilation that marks the heart of the barrier. She clarifies that the heart is where the barrier begins and is sustained, yet she only sensed a single person maintaining it. Realizing the scale of the situation, they conclude that one exceptionally skilled individual is sustaining the entire barrier alone. The sword god warns that such enemies specialize in escape tactics, and that searching for them inside the barrier will not be easy. Shia explains that the barrier's size allows the heart to shift locations, meaning the caster could be hiding anywhere within it. They agree that the next step is figuring out how to locate the heart itself before making any reckless moves. Nerl suddenly steps in the cave entrance and addresses Shia, who she claims she hasn't seen for 10 years. Shock flashes across Shia's face as she questions why Nerl has appeared now. Nerl points out that the princess always seems to go to the cave whenever something troubles her. The princess flails and denies it outright as Nerl presses her. Nerl laughs it off and confirms that the person in front of her is really the princess. Shia is shocked that Nerl believes it truly is her, as she admits that even her own father once rejected her identity, while Nerl calmly reframes it as grief. Nerl explains that the Beast King's rage only deepened after losing the real princess. Despite everything, Nerl takes her and chooses to believe in her. She reminds the princess of a promise made long ago and embraces her without hesitation. The group realizes the spell was broken not by force but by trust strong enough to overcome it. Ryu remarks on how rare it is to have a friend like that, while the sword god teases that she has him. Kane reflects that Ryu's sudden reaction likely came from years of isolation with only her master at her side. He notes that the darkness around her scatters like starlight. Kane reassures her quietly, but the moment is cut short by an aggressive coughing. Shia holds Nerl as she starts to cough violently. She rushes forward to heal her, but the sword god stops her and warns that Nerl's twisted mana will only make things worse. Panicking, Shia clutches her talisman and freezes as Nerl weakly calls out to her. Nerl slips from her grasp and crashes to the ground as Shia calls out her name. Her cry echoes as she tries to lift Nerl up. Ryu realizes the barrier spell is the reason her condition has turned lethal. Kane's eyes widen as a sudden and dangerous realization hits him. He lunges forward without hesitation, grabbing Shia and pulling her back from harm. The group braces as Nerl starts to stand up and a dark pressure coils around her. Kane recognizes the swords surrounding her and realizes they mirror the ones he once wielded long ago. Rage surges as Nerl lunges forward, accusing the others of defiling the princess's identity. She declares lethal intent, while Kane swiftly appears behind her. The blow lands hard as she is intercepted mid-attack and knocked off balance. Kane commands to restrain her quickly before she can recover. Later, Kane stares silently as Nerl is placed deeper into the cave. The group gathers outside and questions what could have driven Nerl into such a state. Kane concludes that the barrier rejected her existence and violently restored her afterward. He recalls seeing shadows consume Nerl within the barrier. He then reveals that the barrier is named the Shadow World, where everything caught inside is stripped away and reborn as hollow puppets. Relief briefly washes over Shia when she realizes Nerl and her true family were never part of it and believes normalcy can return once the barrier falls. But Kane makes it clear that those absorbed are not imprisoned but completely consumed. He declares that her continent has been entirely erased from existence. The royal family and every resident of the continent have been used to construct the Shadow World itself. Shia breaks down as the weight of that reality finally crashes onto her. She collapses as the others rush forward to catch her. She lies unconscious as the group quietly wonders what their next step should be. Kane plans to hunt down the caster and end the barrier before morning. He explains that the Shadow World is a ritual barrier built from countless formations and elements, and from that structure he deduces where its core must be. His conclusion points to the Beast King's chamber at the very top of the palace as the most likely location of the barrier's heart. Inside the chamber, a figure calls out to Kane with hatred. Using the final message left behind by Sean, he describes how he's now found a way to imprison Kane forever inside the Shadow World. Magic swirls from his fingers as he declares his intent to escape and live freely. He proclaims himself the rightful king who will rule over all of creation. Kane reveals that the master of all creation is hiding in the Beast King's room on the 8th floor, guarded by shadow puppets. They identify the Beast King as the most dangerous threat among the defenders. With little time to spare, they decide to strike before the master of creation notices the assault and summons the Beast King's shadow forces. By dawn, the kingdom's prayer ritual will call the Beast King forth, which will create a brief opening to act. As the ritual begins and the castle empties, Kane recognizes this moment as their best chance to strike the master of all creation. Chaos erupts as the castle comes under attack and guards scramble to stop the group. The sword god charges into the fray with force, cutting through enemies without hesitation. Trusting the others, he orders them to reach the top floor while he holds the enemy back. The team sprints through the corridors toward the upper levels as the battle rages behind them. Kane checks on Shia as she moves with quiet focus. She appears stable for the moment despite the lingering truth. Earlier, the group discussed the sword god and Kane splitting up while the two girls stayed behind. Shia insists on going with them, standing up despite the concern written on everyone's faces. The sword god sternly warns that losing control of her emotions would endanger everyone, but she insists that they will need an exorcist if they're up against a spellcaster. The sword god agrees and instructs Ryu to protect Shia. As they run, Kane steels himself with the resolve that if she loses control, he will have to stop her. The group charges through the castle corridor at full speed. A glowing magic circle suddenly activates beneath their feet. Dark shadows surge upward around them, revealing the space itself has become a trap. Kane explains that the illusion barrier constantly pushes intruders toward the void and becomes impossible to break once fully activated. He urgently tells Shia to prepare the 8 lights array. She responds without hesitation and immediately begins activating the formation. The array erupts as glowing sigils and wind surge together, swallowing the surrounding shadows. Ryu looks down in shock as the shadows recoil. She acknowledges that the spell she used works by absorbing mana and is far more effective than direct shadow cleansing. Kane starts to reason that the Master of Creation likely expected Shia to handle the illusion barrier, which makes its activation suspicious. A sudden realization hits him, and he urgently throws his weapon to the priestess as he senses she will need it. Shia catches the weapon midair as the shadows twist and regroup around her. The shadows start to envelop her. A violent surge erupts ahead of them as the illusion barrier collapses inward. Ryu asks if Shia sacrificed herself for them, and Kane confirms it. Ryu refuses to follow Kane as she questions how Kane could casually command Shia to commit such a sacrifice. Kane calmly explains that sacrificing one person was the most rational option to prevent everyone from falling. He admits the choice weighs heavily on him, promising to rescue Shia from the illusion barrier once this is over. After a brief check, they confirm Shia is still alive and decide there is no time to stop now. They hurry up the stairs before a sudden impact slams into them from the side. As they regain their footing, the presence of the Beast King becomes unmistakable and time turns critical. Reaching the 7th floor, they realize they have made it this far without encountering a single shadow puppet. They move cautiously through the corridor, both uneasy as the atmosphere of the floor feels wrong. Kane explains that the Beast King's room should be beyond this area and warns that any traps would likely be concentrated here. From above, the pair advance up the stairs. A sudden voice catches them off guard as it welcomes them as intruders. A woman blocks their path and declares that she cannot allow them to proceed any further. They instantly recognize her as Tessa, the shield of the imperial family whose defensive prowess surpasses even the sword god. Tessa looks unsettled when Ryu claims to know her. They then realize the barrier has already consumed another ally and the situation is worsening fast. Ignoring their pleas, Tessa launches herself forward in a sudden attack. Ryu immediately jolts away to dodge it. She grits her teeth as she realizes she cannot force her way through this opponent. She orders Kane to continue upward, while Kane worries about her being left behind with Tessa. Ryu tightens her grip on her weapon as she acknowledges the impossibility. Power surges as she centers her stance. Convinced she can still win, she launches forward in a decisive charge. Their weapons collide in a violent clash that shakes the hall. Kane watches closely, recognizing the technique she is using from his 3rd life. He realizes her strength may be tied to memories and skills from a past life, which may be the same case for him. As the fight intensifies, she urges Kane to hurry and move on ahead. Kane turns toward the sealed doors of the upper floor, leaving her behind to face Tessa alone. He steps through the door as the voice admits he didn't expect Kane to ignore Tessa. The vast sanctuary unfolds before Kane as the enemy welcomes him into the space as the former master of all creation. He declares himself the current ruler of all creation. Kane advances up the steps and closes the distance. He reaches out to test the barrier, immediately recognizing it as a manifestation of Atroma's power. The enemy explains that Kane's lack of mana prevents the barrier from being broken. Standing face to face, the enemy boasts that Kane will be unable to absorb any power within this space. Kane remains unfazed and treats the situation as an opportunity for conversation rather than a trap. The enemy smiles at how quickly Kane arrived, clearly pleased by the unexpected timing. With a theatrical flourish, he proposes turning the confrontation into a twisted game of chess. Kane admits he is not in the mood for games as he faces the enemy directly across the board. The enemy asserts control of the situation, making it clear that information comes at a cost. Kane reluctantly agrees to play, knowing refusal would only worsen his position. The enemy opens the match casually, treating the encounter like entertainment rather than a duel. Kane realizes the chessboard itself responds to spoken commands, turning the game into a test of power. As the pieces move, Kane questions the enemy's choice of barrier. The conversation reveals that the barrier's design was intentional, meant to exploit Kane's frustration and limits. Kane connects this to how his barrier was used to reach the 2nd continent, realizing how closely he has been studied. A chess piece shatters mid-game. Kane concludes that the barrier was designed solely to prevent the enemy's power from being drained. Cain calmly advances a piece and explains that the barrier is permanently sustained. He looks up and directly calls out the true objective, that the entire setup is meant to imprison him. The enemy laughs openly and confirms the plan, declaring his intention to seal the space and reign uncontested. Cain counters that it would be easier to kill him, while the enemy admits he doesn't plan on dying like Sean. Cain cuts back and labels the plan as cowardly rather than clever. Cain questions why a coward would bother with a chess match while possible reinforcements close in. Reclining with confidence, the enemy dismisses all threats while Cain claims one person still has the power to stop him. Cain exposes the truth, accusing him of removing her first because he felt cornered by Shia. The enemy argues that there's no way for Shia to break the illusion by herself. With a final decisive move, Cain declares victory as the board fractures into checkmate. The enemy reacts with shock as it sinks in. Cain proposes another match as he acknowledges the enemy's desire to win. He smirks and deliberately removes his queen to make the game more fun for the enemy. Elsewhere, Shia lies unconscious as worried voices call her name and urge her to wake up. A familiar voice reaches her, stirring recognition as her eyes slowly open. The Beast King approaches with concern and asks if she had a nightmare. She awakens to see her parents beside her and instinctively calls out to them. Surrounded by her family, Shia finally realizes that Neril and everyone else survived and are still with her. Overcome with emotion, she clings to her mother and breaks into tears. For a brief moment, she believes everything is as it should be and that her family is alive. She's gently pulled along, as the family suggests, stepping outside together, and for a moment the idea feels warm and ordinary. She walks ahead through the hall when she notices something on the floor. Her attention suddenly fixes on Cain's sword. The realization hits that if the sword is here, then the nightmare she remembers was never just a dream. As she looks around the people she loves, the terrifying thought forms that this peaceful world itself may be an illusion. Cracks spread across her vision like a shattered seal. Surrounded by her family, she wishes she could stay here forever and pretend nothing is wrong. Her expression hardens as she accepts that she must return to reality and face the truth with her own hands. She pulls everyone into a tight embrace and expresses her love before the inevitable separation. Even knowing it is only an illusion, she is grateful she was able to say goodbye. She walks forward alone and says her farewell as the dream world begins to feel unbearably quiet. The chessboard settles into silence as a checkmate is declared. The enemy calmly explains that he won by discarding the very power meant to guarantee victory. Cain studies the board and reflects that the outcome would have changed if his queen had remained. He demonstrates how a single queen move would have secured absolute victory. The enemy dismisses excuses and mocks the idea that the loss could be blamed on missing pieces. Cain counters that reality does not follow the rules of a board game, and lost pieces can return. The barrier fractures as he clarifies that the queen will always return. A green light tears through the hall as Shia descends back into play. Shia stands reborn in emerald radiance, declaring her return. The enemy recoils in shock as the impossible reality finally crashes down on him. She steps forward and asserts her authority as the princess and the last remaining heir. Energy coils around her as she resolves to end everything herself without hesitation. The enemy staggers back in disbelief as the pressure of her power overwhelms him. Lightning surges violently through the air as her attack is unleashed in a blinding flash. The castle trembles as waves of energy ripple outward from the impact. When the dust settles, the pair stands unshaken while their opponent struggles to rise. Laughing weakly, the enemy admits that he has lost everything as well after mocking the absolute one. Before the final blow falls, Cain demands an answer as to why he chose to fight him. He tells him plainly that, with Sean's memories, he thought for sure he had a chance to defeat Cain. Cain accuses him of hiding his true strength and questions how such limited power could ever let him escape his seal. He presses him and insists that he simply didn't have enough power to create a stronger barrier. He leans closer and demands an explanation as the enemy struggles to form his words. A grim memory surfaces where a shadowy existence looms behind him, threatening erasure if he fails to prove his worth. Cain asks whether this fate was revealed by Sean, only to learn the knowledge came from a deeper law within. The enemy admits he had no choice but to fight in order to survive against what awaited him. He calls Cain as the apostle of the end and declares that destiny has set them as natural enemies. He falls and suggests that Cain accept his destiny. But Cain refuses to accept a future dictated by fate alone. He suddenly staggers and clutches his head while Shia reaches out in concern. He steadies himself and reveals the source of his strength as an all-encompassing authority that transcends everything. He gathers power in his palms as he calls himself the true master of all things. Outside, the sword god battles heavily with the Beast King. The Beast King turns in confusion, demanding answers as he senses something is off. The sword god calmly notes that Cain appears to have won. The Beast King's eyes widen in confusion. He recoils in shock, realizing the sword god stands before him. He groans and questions why this confrontation is happening now. He raises a hand to his face as the idea that his lost memories might be returning finally hits him. He recoils in shock as he realizes what he has done to Shia, while the sword god notices that they're turning back into shadows. Tessa steps forward from the doorway and calmly explains the nature of the shadow world. The sword god notices her injuries and demands to know whether she too was swallowed by the same darkness. She confirms it and coldly remarks that Ryu was responsible for her wounds, noting how her techniques resemble the Beast King's. The sword god reacts in shock that Ryu did the damage, while Tessa warns that time is running out for the Beast King. They agree that he deserves to say goodbye despite being a puppet. Tessa tells them that Shia is currently on the 8th floor. She urges them to hurry up as the sword god carries the Beast King towards the highest floor. Cain descends from the air as the two girls rush to him. The sword god appears with the Beast King as they finally find her. Shia cries out when she finds her father slumped and barely standing. The Beast King gently reaches for her and speaks to her with warmth despite his failing body. Shia freezes in disbelief as she realizes her father truly knows who she is. The Beast King pulls her close and confesses his love. His body begins to crumble into shadows right in her hands. Shia is left kneeling alone as the world narrows to the loss she cannot accept. Ryu and the sword god remain silent as her cries echo. She collapses to the ground, overwhelmed by grief and helplessness. She tries to steady herself when Cain suddenly cuts in and asks her not to cry. He gathers power in silence, resolving to reject this ending and change fate itself as the master of all creation. Cain focuses his power and resolves to overwrite a false fate with his own truth. A pillar of light tears through the darkness as the world begins to reset. The light surges and triggers a complete reversal of the distorted reality. The palace is bathed in warm light as the nightmare finally collapses. The darkness fades completely and everything stolen by the shadow world is restored. Cain reassures her that there is no need to grieve anymore. She holds on to him, realizing he was never as distant as he pretended to be. She smiles through her tears, grateful and certain that he is a good person. Cain admits she looks better now, but says he still has something important to do. He quietly announces that he will be leaving for a short journey. Cain arrives in the darkness and immediately senses that someone has been waiting for him. A shadowed figure steps forward and makes it clear she has been watching his every move. She formally welcomes Cain by name as she emerges from behind the curtain. Cain freezes in shock when he realizes the presence confronting him is a woman tied to his grandfather. She invites him to sit for a conversation, while Cain reluctantly wonders what the conversation must be about. She calmly admits that accepting all of creation means being poison to him, yet still insists on speaking honestly. She clarifies that what she wants is not her own revival but something far more deliberate. She offers Cain her power and knowledge while stripping away her personality to make the deal easier to swallow. Her condition lies on his willingness to teach her all about this word, which makes Cain consider the tempting terms, but he rejects the offer outright, making it clear that her power is not what he truly seeks. He calmly explains that embracing everything in creation would only weaken him rather than empower him. He continues by admitting that knowing the full truth would have cost him his life long ago. The woman counters by insisting her knowledge is still the only way he survives the future. She presses closer, challenging whether he truly believes he can proceed without her. Cain reflects that even Sean was ignorant of the threat she keeps mentioning. After a moment of thought, Cain agrees to her terms while making his priorities clear. She warns Cain that survival depends on convincing the witch of the third continent to side with him. The palace stands quietly as Cain is urgently called by name. Walking beside Shia, Cain reassures her that he is fine despite everything that happened. After meeting the master of all creation, he was back in a room in the palace. When he woke up, he reassures Shia that he is fine while acknowledging how difficult it must have been for her to escape the illusion barrier. But since he used a reversal magic that erased all memories of the shadow world, everyone else had no memories of the phenomenon. To outsiders, the incident was explained as the simple dispelling of a barrier. The Beast King admits his disbelief that the savior of his continent turned out to be someone so young. He offers his gratitude and promises a suitable reward, while Cain quietly insists he did not act for compensation. The Beast King and Shia push back anyway, noting that generosity clearly runs in the family and refusing to let him decline. Cain finally agrees to accept the reward but explains that he is in the middle of a journey and cannot take on anything overwhelming. Shia suddenly brings up the mimic, and Cain covers her mouth immediately. Panicking at the implication, Cain hurriedly asks her to keep the mimic a secret. Watching the exchange unfold, the queen can only react with amusement. Cain awkwardly realizes he has been rude to the princess and tries to smooth things over. The Beast King calmly explains that the royal family has always been drawn to strength, which leaves his daughter confused and uneasy. He rises from his seat and declares that this attraction is simply the instinct of beastmen. The Beast King's eyes flare as he questions Kane's true strength. He ignites his fighting spirit and openly challenges Kane to a match, staking his daughter's future on the outcome. Kane is visibly caught off guard as the challenge suddenly shifts from vague tension to a direct demand about his relationship with Xia. The Beast King explodes with conviction, declaring that backing down is not an option and charging forward without hesitation. Xia suddenly attacks his father and sends debris flying. Everyone panics as they worry for their king. As dust settles, it becomes clear to the Beast King that Xia's power has surged dramatically. Her father immediately senses something strange in her mana within her diadem. He connects the change to an ancient artifact long thought lost, exposing a secret Xia tried desperately to keep hidden. The hall fills with revelation as blood, prophecy, and artifact align to declare the Chosen One's ascent. Xia hesitates as she is pressed to explain everything she has just learned. Kane turns away, wondering if he can pull wool over their eyes again. Ryu suddenly bursts in with urgency, calling out as she charges forward in panic. Confusion spreads when the Beast King stands present, unchanged and very much alive. Kane realizes with shock that Ryu remembers events from the Shadow World. He quietly pulls her aside, asking for a private moment away from the others. As the door closes, it becomes clear to Ryu that no one else remembers the Shadow World at all. Kane explains that neither the priestess nor the sword god remembers anything beyond the moment the Sky Dragon appeared. Kane admits he does not know why only they remember, but it makes sense for himself that he would remember. He silently wonders why Ryu alone still remembers events from the Shadow World. She suggests it may be connected to a strange dream she experienced. She clarifies that the dream felt less like a vision and more like an unpleasant nightmare. She brushes it off and shifts the conversation, asking Kane a more personal question instead. She asks him to keep secret that she defeated Tessa, hinting at deeper ties to Xia's family's swordsmanship. She explains that using the divine style and even bloodstream power felt completely natural to her at that moment. Kane reflects on how unnatural that sounds. He realizes that just as he once synchronized with another self, Ryu may have unconsciously done the same across worlds. She admits that to her, a sword is just a sword. She declares her resolve to grow stronger and repay her master for all he has done, while Kane agrees and asks for secrecy about the continent's return. The two decide they should apologize to the Beast King, as Kane reflects on the deeper meaning behind the Master of All in Creation's words. The Master reiterates that Kane must gain the Third Continent's support and that Ryu is key to making it happen. He then invites her to travel to the Third Continent, leaving her surprised and curious about the reason. Kane explains that the journey will be a valuable experience, especially since opportunities to travel with someone of his strength are rare. Ryu thinks it over and resolves that if she wants to surpass her current limits, this path makes sense. She accepts as they shake on it. 2 days later, preparations are underway as everyone laments that their guests must leave before a proper farewell. The sword god explains he must first deal with an urgent matter at the sword school, while Kane prepares for his own matter. The Beast King promises a proper welcome as he gently sees them off. The group departs down the road while goodbyes are exchanged from both sides. Xia stays behind to deal with the divine artifact while quietly accepting the separation. A sudden shout makes Xia's eyes snap wide in alarm. Kane and Ryu wave back from the wagon with confident smiles. Xia forces a bright farewell smile despite her lingering worry. Kane sits in silence as something unseen begins to feel wrong. Pain suddenly surges through his body without warning. Ryu rushes to catch him as he collapses, panic spreading through the wagon. Xia freezes as a familiar scent of peaches reaches her. Her eyes widen as she calls out to Kane. Kane stirs to consciousness as the faint sound of waves pulls him back from the edge of sleep. He wakes on a wooden bed inside a small cabin while Ryu calmly explains how long he has been out. As he looks toward the window and the sea beyond it, he realizes they must have traveled while he was unconscious. Sitting up, he checks himself and answers that he feels mostly fine despite the lingering fatigue. Ryu admits she was worried because his mana control vanished earlier, which clearly surprises him. Kane admits he feels lightheaded but insists his condition is not that different from usual. A faint glow near his chest confirms that mana is responding again within his body. He stares down in disbelief, realizing that even a small amount of mana has truly returned. Ryu reacts casually, treating it as something that happens from time to time when he sleeps. Kane quietly reflects that Ryu has not noticed his long manaless state and wonders if the elixirs he consumed earlier are finally taking effect. He decides to observe the situation further as the ship cuts steadily across the open sea. Beneath the water, something stirs, and a massive presence slowly comes into focus. The deck suddenly erupts as enormous tentacles burst upward and crash down onto the vessel. The crew scrambles as they realize they are being attacked. Ryu panics as the ship violently shakes beneath their feet. Kane quickly assesses the situation and recognizes the attack as coming from a sea monster. Ryu offers to check it out, but Kane stops her and points toward the window, revealing the monster's massive eye staring directly at them. The monster's massive eye snaps into focus as it locks onto Kane's presence. The monster catches sight of him, and it immediately celebrates finding what it came for. A distant warning echoes in his mind about places his restored mana must never approach. Sitting together on the bed, Kane presses for clarity while Rain hesitates before answering. Rain singles out the ocean as the most dangerous place of all. He explains that surviving the elixirs only makes the sea deadlier than anything else. Sword in hand, Kane connects the warning to the monstrous presence closing in outside the ship. He confirms that his grandfather's words were not metaphorical. Kane concludes that fighting it now is impossible with his current strength and nowhere to escape. Accepting reality, he steels himself and chooses to face the threat alongside Ryu as they head for the deck together. A crew member is suddenly snatched by a massive tentacle as chaos erupts on deck. The sea monster rears higher, its limbs thrashing as sailors scatter in panic. A witch counters with a powerful lightning spell aimed at the monster. The monster pushes through the attack, forcing the caster to realize her strongest spell failed. Kane lunges in and cleaves upward, carving through the creature with a clean strike. Ryu gathers the remaining crew and tells Kane she's got them. Kane shields the wounded caster and urges her to retreat as he takes it from here. Kane and Ryu move in perfect sync, bracing themselves as the sea monster rises fully before them. A violent surge of water slams up. The water twists and forms razor-sharp streams that spiral toward them. Kane and Ryu look up just in time to recognize the attack as a barrage of water arrows. The arrows crash down in an explosive impact as the pair jolts away to dodge. Kane wonders if Ryu is unable to easily cut down the arrows after her awakening. He realizes that her level of control was only available to her in the shadow world. He freezes for a moment as the situation clicks. He immediately warns her of an incoming attack which she barely dodges. Kane tells Ryu the creature gripping the hull is far beyond an ordinary monster and that it is smart enough to conduct plans. The deck suddenly trembles underfoot. The monster coils its body around the ship as it begins to climb aboard. Kane gauges the situation and concludes the ship will overturn if the monster keeps pulling itself up. Without waiting, he grabs Ryu and prepares to act before the vessel collapses. In one swift motion, he leaps away from the ship while carrying her. Kane starts to run along the water, which surprises Ryu. The monster's enormous eye follows them from the surface. Kane heads straight toward a distant island, running across the sea as if it were solid ground. Once they reach the shore, Ryu finally asks to be set down. They reassess their surroundings and acknowledge the danger is not over yet. Ryu steels herself as the reality sinks in that they will still have to fight the monster head-on. She tumbles across the sand as the monster's tentacle surges closer from the sea. Kane urges her to retreat from the ocean's edge. He asks her to buy him a few seconds, and she echoes the request with disbelief. She steps forward to face the monster head-on. She admits she can only know her limits by trying, and Kane entrusts the moment to her. The monster roars and charges as Ryu rushes straight at it without hesitation. Kane plants himself behind her, gripping his sword as he steadies his breathing. Green mana coils around his blade, reminding him that control matters more than quantity. He raises his sword and refines his stance, focusing on skill as his mana responds to his will. The memory of his grandfather's power overlaps with the present as Kane witnesses what true mastery looks like. Back then, Rain had only used a smidge of mana to part the sea. Kane steadies his stance and forces his body to mirror the technique he once saw long ago. He closes his eyes and reconnects with the long-forgotten sensation of using mana. Mana begins to spiral around him. Ryu throws herself into danger to buy time as the monster lashes out again. She leaps into the air, fixed on the idea that she only needs to buy as much time as she can. She launches herself upward and fixes her sights on the creature's glaring eye. The pupil suddenly twitches and breaks apart before she reaches it. It opens to reveal a spiraling set of sharp teeth, threatening to engulf her. Ryu struggles as the creature tries to crush her from within. Kane's voice suddenly cuts in and apologizes for taking longer than he thought. A piercing green beam fires downward from the monster's core and cleaves through its body. The blast tears the creature apart from the inside, splitting it violently in two. Ryu's eyes widen as she stares into the sea. The ocean parts completely, leaving a massive corridor of water split open before them. He calmly notes that this feat still falls short of what he needs to surpass his grandfather. He suddenly jolts in pain as he admits he feels dizzy after pushing himself harder than usual. She urges him to rest, even if only for a moment. The monster's limbs shake as it desperately thinks that it has to bring Kane to someone important. Without warning, the monster's tentacle grabs Kane's body. The monster sends him flying into the water as Ryu reaches out in panic. He crashes into the water with a violent splash, while she screams his name from the shore. Beneath the surface, his